Bifrost was not meant to shatter. Across the 9 realms, through millennia of Asgardian dominance, the Rainbow Bridge had stood as the ultimate expression of cosmic engineering. Gods had traveled its length. Armies had marched across its crystalline surface. Reality itself bent to accommodate its passage through the void between worlds. Until Kronika's desperate manipulation of time created fractures no one could have anticipated. The Keeper of Time, in her obsessive pursuit of the perfect timeline, had torn through dimensional barriers with the subtlety of a meteor through parchment. Her hourglass, channeling temporal energies that transcended understanding, had created ripples across the multiverse itself. And one such ripple had just collided with the Bifrost at the precise moment Thor Odinson was returning from Vanaheim. The god of thunder barely had time to register the wrongness, the way reality screamed in colors that shouldn't exist, before the bridge exploded beneath him. Heimdall! Thor's voice carried the full weight of divine fury as dimensional energy unlike anything in the 9 realms swallowed him whole. The last thing he saw was the Rainbow Bridge fragmenting into impossible geometries, each shard reflecting versions of reality that made his immortal mind recoil. Then nothing. Then everything. Then Middle-earth. The breaking of Helm's Deep. The wall exploded, not from Saruman's bomb, though that had been placed and primed, not from the Uruk-hai's battering ram, though 10,000 orcs pressed against Rohan's last defense. The wall of Helm's Deep, ancient stonework that had withstood sieges for 3,000 years, simply ceased to exist in a 20-foot radius. Thunder answered first. Lightning split the sky in patterns that made the stars themselves seem dim by comparison. Then came the impact, a force that had nothing to do with the siege, nothing to do with Saruman's treachery, nothing to do with anything the people of Middle-earth could possibly understand. Thor crashed into the outer wall of Helm's Deep with the force of a falling star. The deeping wall, 30 feet of dwarf-carved stone designed to withstand the fury of armies, crumbled like sand. Ancient mortar that had held for millennia turned to powder. Blocks weighing tons were launched hundreds of feet in every direction. The impact crater extended 15 feet into the solid rock of the mountain itself. Uruk-hai warriors, the strongest soldiers ever bred by Saruman's dark craft, were obliterated instantly. Those within 50 feet simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the sheer kinetic energy of a god's arrival. Those within 100 feet were thrown like ragdolls, their enhanced bodies proving as fragile as kindling against divine force. The siege stopped. 10,000 Uruk-hai, bred for war and knowing no fear, froze in absolute confusion. Their target, the wall they'd been dying to breach for hours, now had a crater the size of a house carved into its center. And floating above that crater, rising from dust and destruction like a nightmare given form, was something their limited understanding couldn't process. Thor rose slowly, Mjolnir gripped loosely in one hand. Armor scorched but unbroken, cape billowing in winds that had nothing to do with the storm overhead. His eyes blazed with divine lightning as he surveyed his surroundings with the confusion of a predator who'd just woken in unfamiliar territory. "Where am I?" The god of thunder's voice carried across the battlefield like a physical force. Stones cracked. Uruk-hai staggered. Inside Helm's Deep, soldiers clasped their ears against the sonic assault of a god's irritation. In the throne room of Meduseld, Theoden would later swear he heard the question as clearly as if spoken beside him despite being 20 miles away. On the wall above, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli stared in absolute incomprehension at the figure below. They had fought Balrogs and Nazgul. They had witnessed Gandalf's return from death. They had seen Sauron's forces and felt the weight of the One Ring. This was different. "What in the name of the Valor?" Legolas whispered, his elven eyes picking out details that mortal vision would miss. The figure's armor was unlike anything in Middle-earth, not steel or mithril, but something that seemed to drink in light and refract it as power. The hammer he carried casually in one hand radiated energy that made the elf's ancient instincts scream warnings about standing too close to lightning strikes. "That's no man," Gimli muttered, gripping his axe with hands that wanted to tremble. "And no elf either, begging your pardon, Legolas. I don't know what that is." Aragorn's hand found the hilt of Andúril, though some part of him recognized the futility of the gesture. His Númenórean blood, the gift of his ancestors that granted him strength and perception beyond normal men, was screaming a single message: power, absolute power, power that makes the Witch King seem a mere shadow. "Whatever he is," Aragorn said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of kings, "he just arrived in the middle of our battle, and those Uruk-hai don't know whether to attack or flee." Below, Thor's confusion was rapidly transforming into irritation. He'd been yanked from the Bifrost, hurled across dimensions and deposited in what appeared to be some primitive battlefield. Worse, he was covered in dust. His armor was scratched, and he had no idea where Heimdall or Asgard were. "I am Thor, son of Odin," he announced to anyone listening, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent battlefield. "If this is Muspelheim's doing, show yourself. If this is Loki's trick, brother, I am not amused." The Uruk-hai, bred by Saruman to know no fear, discovered something new that night: existential confusion. Their orders had been simple: breach the wall, kill the defenders, leave none alive. But orders didn't cover floating men who spoke in thunder and carved craters with their arrival. One Uruk-hai, a captain who'd led the charge against the wall, made a decision. In his limited tactical experience, anything that destroyed the wall was either ally or obstacle. Since it didn't wear the white hand of Saruman, it was obstacle. "Kill it!" the captain roared in the black speech, raising his blade. "For Saruman! For the white hand!" 100 Uruk-hai surged forward, their fear overcome by conditioning and bloodlust. Massive warriors bred specifically for killing, each standing over 6 feet tall, each carrying weapons designed to cleave through armor and bone. They had crushed Rohan's armies in open battle. They had driven defenders back step by bloody step. They lasted approximately 3 seconds against a god. Thor didn't even raise Mjolnir. He simply looked at them. Lightning erupted from his eyes. Not metaphorically, actual divine electricity that made every storm in Middle-earth's history seem like static sparks. Bolts of pure energy that carried the power of Asgard itself, channeled through a being who'd been born in thunder and raised by the god of storms. The first wave of Uruk-hai simply burned. Their bodies, designed to withstand tremendous punishment, proved as resistant to godly lightning as parchment to dragonfire. They didn't scream. They didn't have time. One moment they were charging. The next they were ash sculptures that collapsed into the mud. The second wave saw this and tried to stop. Momentum carried them forward anyway. Thor flicked Mjolnir almost lazily. The hammer moved faster than Legolas could track, and the elf could count falling leaves in a forest gale. It struck the lead Uruk-hai in the chest with enough force to create a visible shockwave. The creature exploded. Not died, not fell. Exploded, as if its body had been the epicenter of a lightning strike. Mjolnir continued through 3 more Uruk-hai before returning to Thor's hand with a crack of displaced air that shattered eardrums for 100 feet. "Weak," Thor observed, examining the crater his hammer had carved through the enemy formation. "Barely worthy of Asgardian training automatons. Where am I that the warriors are so feeble?" On the wall, Aragorn felt his worldview restructuring itself. "Those Uruk-hai, they've killed dozens of our best soldiers. They're stronger than 3 normal men, tireless, fearless. And he just called them weak. Gimli finished, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and dread. The remaining Uruk-hai army made a collective decision that would have astounded Saruman. They retreated. Not routed, these were disciplined soldiers, but pulled back in organized ranks, creating distance between themselves and the crater where Thor stood assessing his surroundings like a tourist confused by local customs. "Finally!" a voice boomed across the battlefield. And if Thor's voice had been thunder, this was the mountain that challenged the storm. A worthy opponent. From the Uruk-hai ranks emerged a creature that made the others look like children. 12 feet of muscle, fury, and selective breeding, a berserker, one of Saruman's greatest creations. It wore armor plates bolted directly into its flesh, carried a blade the size of a grown man, and its roar carried enough force to crack stone. The berserker charged with speed that should have been impossible for its size. The ground shook. Lesser Uruk-hai dove aside. The creature covered 100 feet in seconds, blade raised to cleave Thor in half. Thor caught the blade one-handed. The impact created a shockwave that shattered every piece of glass remaining in Helm's Deep. The berserker's momentum, enough to punch through a stone wall, stopped dead. Its blade, forged in Isengard's deepest furnaces and capable of cutting through steel, didn't even scratch Thor's palm. "Now this," Thor said, his expression showing genuine interest for the first time, "has slightly more strength than the others. Still weak, but closer to worthy." The berserker tried to wrench its blade free. Failed. Tried to push forward. Failed. Its genetically enhanced muscles, powerful enough to bend iron bars, proved insufficient to move Thor's casual grip a single inch. "You know," Thor mused conversationally, even as the berserker snarled and struggled, "in Asgard we have warriors who train by wrestling bilge snipe. Horrible creatures. Tentacles, teeth quite unpleasant, but excellent for building core strength." He tilted his head, studying the creature. "You remind me of a bilge snipe. Less tentacles, similar temperament." He released the blade. The berserker staggered backward from the sudden lack of resistance. Before it could recover, Thor stepped forward and tapped it on the chest with 2 fingers. The creature flew backward like it had been struck by a battering ram. It crashed through 6 ranks of Uruk-hai, through a siege tower, and finally embedded itself in the hillside 100 yards away. The impact crater was 20 feet across. Silence held the battlefield. "I need answers," Thor announced to the assembled armies, Uruk-hai on one side, shocked defenders on the other. "I am Thor of Asgard, god of thunder, son of Odin All-Father. I was traveling through the Bifrost when something, temporal energy if I'm reading it correctly, tore through dimensional barriers and deposited me." He looked around with growing dismay. "Here, wherever here is." He pointed Mjolnir at the walls of Helm's Deep. "You there, on the fortification. You look slightly more civilized than the ugly ones. Explain, what realm is this? Which of the 9 realms am I in? Because I've visited all of them and I don't recognize any of this." Aragorn, who had faced down the Nazgul, who had walked paths of the dead, who had claimed kingship through sheer force of will, found his voice. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, ranger of the north and heir of Isildur. You stand in Middle-earth in the kingdom of Rohan at the fortress of Helm's Deep." Thor's brow furrowed. "Middle-earth? That's not... I don't know any Middle-earth. Is that a province of Midgard? Has Midgard expanded since I last visited? The mortals there were still arguing about wheeled transportation last time I checked." "We know of no Midgard," Legolas called down, his voice carrying elven clarity. "Nor of your Asgard or 9 realms. I am Legolas of the Woodland Realm, and I have walked this earth for many ages. You speak of places and powers unknown to our histories." "Impossible," Thor muttered. though his expression suggested he was beginning to suspect otherwise. His eyes, which crackled with barely contained lightning, scanned the heavens above. The stars were wrong. Constellations he'd known for 1,500 years were absent. The cosmic geography that any Asgardian could read like a map showed patterns that made no sense. "Oh no," Thor said quietly, and somehow that soft statement carried more dread than his earlier shouts. "Oh no, I'm not in another realm. I'm in another universe entirely." Gimli leaned toward Aragorn. "Is it just me, or does that sound very, very bad?" "It's not just you," Aragorn confirmed, his hand still on Andúral's hilt. Not that he expected a sword. Even a reforged blade of Númenor would prove useful against someone who just demonstrated casual continent-level power. Thor's confusion was transforming into something more dangerous: divine frustration. "This is unacceptable, Heimdall!" His voice carried the full weight of godhood, a sound that made mortal ears bleed and caused the siege weapons to crack. "Heimdall, if you can hear me, activate the Bifrost. I don't care if it's damaged. Open a path home." Nothing happened. Thor tried again, channeling more power. Lightning erupted from his body in a sphere that extended 50 feet. Uruk-hai, unfortunate enough to be within the radius, were flash-fried. The ground beneath Thor's feet turned to glass from the heat. Storm clouds above swirled into a vortex centered on the god of thunder. "Heimdall!" Still nothing. The lightning faded. Thor stood in a crater of melted stone and glass, his expression cycling through anger, worry, and finally settling on grim determination. "The Bifrost is either too damaged or too distant to reach across dimensional barriers," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Which means I'm stranded in an unknown universe during what appears to be some sort of primitive war." He looked around at the battlefield, the destroyed wall, the retreating army of orcs, the defenders watching him with expressions ranging from terror to awe. "Well," Thor sighed, his cape settling around him as the divine energy faded to background levels. "This is exceptionally inconvenient." From inside Helm's Deep, a new voice rang out with power that actually made Thor pause. It carried weight, not physical strength, but authority that transcended the material. Magic, Thor recognized, though of a type he'd never encountered. "Stand fast, Thor of Asgard." The voice belonged to a figure in white robes ascending the stairs to the wall. Gandalf the White, staff in hand, eyes blazing with power that actually registered on Thor's divine senses. "You arrive in Middle-earth at a dark hour, and whether by chance or design, you stand between the free peoples and destruction. I am Gandalf, servant of the secret fire and wielder of the flame of Anor. Before violence escalates further, perhaps we should speak as civilized beings rather than demonstrate our respective powers." Thor studied the wizard with newfound interest. You have actual power. Not much by Asgardian standards, perhaps equivalent to a middling sorcerer, but genuine magic nonetheless." He smiled slightly. "At least someone in this universe isn't completely helpless." Gandalf's eye twitched. Being compared to a middling sorcerer by someone who just vaporized a section of Uruk-hai army was simultaneously insulting and entirely fair. "I propose," Gandalf continued diplomatically, "that we continue this conversation inside the fortress. You clearly aren't with Saruman's forces." "I don't even know who Saruman is," Thor interrupted, "which makes you potential ally rather than enemy. And you clearly need information about where you are and how to return home. Information I might be able to provide." Thor considered this. He was stranded in an unknown universe, surrounded by what appeared to be primitive warfare with no clear way home. Making enemies seemed counterproductive, especially when one of the locals showed signs of actual intelligence and power. "Very well," Thor agreed. He pointed Mjolnir at the Uruk-hai army, which had maintained its distance during this exchange. But those creatures attacked me unprovoked. If they try again, I will not be so gentle. Gentle, he says, Gimli muttered. He vaporized 50 of them and calls it gentle. The Uruk-hai, lacking clear orders and confronted with something their tactics couldn't address, made the tactical decision to withdraw to their siege lines. They'd wait for Saruman's instructions. The White Wizard had created them. Surely he would know how to deal with this impossible warrior. As Thor floated upward toward the wall, actually floated without wings or visible support, the defenders of Helm's Deep scrambled to make way. The god of thunder landed with surprising lightness on the battlements, his boots barely making sound despite the obvious weight of his armor and hammer. Up close, he was even more imposing. 6.5 feet of divine muscle, armor that seemed to shift between metal and energy, and eyes that crackled with barely contained storms. But his expression wasn't hostile, just confused and mildly irritated, like a tourist who'd taken a very wrong turn. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance," Thor said, his voice now conversational rather than reality shaking. "Dimensional travel isn't supposed to be this violent. Someone clearly made a catastrophic mistake with temporal or spatial magic." He looked at Gandalf directly. "You said you might have information. What can you tell me about this Middle-earth? And more importantly, has anyone here been experimenting with time manipulation or dimensional rifts?" Gandalf leaned on his staff, his ancient eyes studying this being who claimed godhood with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating their occupation. "Middle-earth is but one land in Arda, the world created by Eru Ilúvatar and shaped by the Valar. As for time manipulation," the wizard's expression darkened. "There are artifacts and beings of power that might affect such things, but none in current use that I know of. At least not here." "The Valar," Thor perked up. "Are those your gods? Perhaps they're connected to the Aesir somehow. Different names for the same—" "The Valar are not gods," Gandalf corrected gently. "They are the Holy Ones, servants of the One. But this theological discussion can wait. Right now, we face more immediate concerns." He gestured to the siege below. "You've arrived during a battle that may determine the fate of all free peoples in Middle-earth. The enemy you just scattered serves Saruman the White, who has betrayed his order and seeks to conquer Rohan as part of a greater darkness spreading from Mordor." Thor's expression cycled through several emotions before settling on resigned acceptance. "Of course, I'm stranded in another universe, and naturally that universe is in the middle of an apocalyptic war. Because my life needed more complications." He sighed dramatically. "Fine. Explain. Who are the good people, who are the evil people, and what are the stakes? Keep it brief. I'm a warrior, not a scholar." Aragorn stepped forward, offering a slight bow. "The short version. An ancient evil called Sauron seeks to conquer all of Middle-earth. He creates darkness and enslaves peoples to his will. We," he gestured to the defenders, "stand against him, protecting the free peoples. Saruman, who was once our ally, has joined Sauron's forces and sent this army to destroy Rohan, one of the kingdoms of men." "Men?" Thor looked around. "You're all human? I assumed some of you were other species. The tall, pretty one looks like a light elf, and the short, angry one could pass for a dwarf, though he's smaller than any dwarf I've met." "I am an elf," Legolas said, slightly offended. "And what do you mean, light elf?" "He is a dwarf," Gimli growled, definitely offended. "And a dwarf of Erebor is worth 3 of any other dwarf, so watch your tongue, god or no god." "Fascinating," Thor said, genuinely interested. "Your universe has similar species, but different. Everything else, apparently. This is going to be confusing." He shook his head. "Regardless, the situation seems clear enough. Evil Dark Lord, corrupted wizard, army of monsters trying to kill everyone. I'm familiar with this pattern. We had similar problems with the Dark Elves and Malekith. He planted Mjolnir on the stone battlements with a thud that cracked the rock. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to help you win this battle. Not because I'm choosing sides in your local politics, but because those creatures, he pointed at the Uruk-hai lines, attacked me first, and I'm still irritated about being yanked across dimensional boundaries. Consider it payment for information and shelter while I figure out how to get home. Also, Thor added almost as an afterthought, I'm hungry. Interdimensional travel apparently works up an appetite. You wouldn't happen to have any food, would you? Preferably something substantial. I once ate an entire ox after fighting the Cronan army. Lovely rock creatures, terrible conversationalists. The defenders exchanged glances. They were besieged, outnumbered 10-1, facing an army specifically bred to kill them, with supplies running low and reinforcements uncertain. And a self-proclaimed god had just offered to help them win in exchange for dinner and information. Aragorn made a decision that would echo through Middle-earth's history. He clasped Thor's forearm in the warrior's grip, noting that the god's forearm felt like clasping lightning-warmed steel. Thor of Asgard, I accept your aid. Let us drive back Saruman's forces together, and afterward we will feast, and I will tell you everything you wish to know about Middle-earth. Thor grinned, and for the first time since arriving, he looked genuinely pleased. Now that's the spirit. I knew you surface people had potential. You've got that warrior bearing I recognize. Your army, on the other hand. He surveyed the exhausted, wounded defenders of Helm's Deep with critical eye. They need rest, food, and probably healing. How long have you been fighting? Hours, Legolas said quietly. They're exhausted. We've held, but barely. Before you arrived, we were preparing for a last stand. Unacceptable, Thor declared. Wars are won by rested warriors with full bellies, not exhausted soldiers making heroic sacrifices. Very dramatic, heroic sacrifices, but tactically questionable. He turned to Gandalf. You, wizard. You have healing magic? Some, Gandalf admitted carefully. Then start healing. I'll handle the army outside. Thor picked up Mjolnir and walked to the edge of the battlements, looking down at the Uruk-hai forces that had pulled back to their siege lines. 10,000 strong, disciplined, bred for war. Tell me, Thor called back over his shoulder. These Uruk-hai, they're all soldiers of this Saruman, yes? All committed to conquest and destruction? Yes, Aragorn confirmed, wondering where this was leading. And they won't surrender or retreat permanently. They know no fear, Gimli said. They'll fight to the last. Perfect. Thor's grin became decidedly dangerous. Then I don't need to hold back. He raised Mjolnir to the sky. The storm that had been brewing since his arrival, suppressed by his control, was suddenly released with full divine fury. Clouds that had been dark turned black as pitch. Lightning that had been occasional became constant, a web of electricity that turned night into flickering day. I am Thor, son of Odin, god of thunder. His voice carried across the battlefield with enough force to shake the foundations of Helm's Deep. The Uruk-hai army, which had been reorganizing their siege lines, froze. You have attacked a god of Asgard. You have interrupted my travels. You have annoyed me. Lightning began falling. Not random strikes, targeted bolts that hit siege towers, battering rams, and concentrated troop formations with sniper precision. Each strike carried enough power to turn stone to glass, metal to slag. Normally, I would simply destroy all of you and be done with it, Thor continued, and every word was punctuated by thunder that made teeth rattle. But I'm told you're already committed to serving evil, so I don't feel particularly bad about this. He swung Mjolnir in a wide arc, Lightning erupted from the hammer in a horizontal strike that swept across the battlefield like a scythe through wheat. The bolt was 50 feet wide and traveled at the speed of light, carving through siege equipment, fortifications, and any Uruk-hai unfortunate enough to be in its path. 3,000 Uruk-hai died in that single strike. The remaining 7,000 broke. Discipline, breeding, fearlessness, none of it mattered against divine fury that could erase entire formations with casual gestures. They ran, scrambling over each other in panic, fleeing toward Isengard and whatever protection Saruman's walls might offer. Thor watched them go with satisfaction. Much better. Now then, he floated back down to the battlements, his storm fading to normal background weather. About that food, and information, and perhaps directions to whoever might know about interdimensional travel in this universe. I'd very much like to go home. Behind him, the defenders of Helm's Deep stared in shocked silence at the battlefield. The siege that had threatened to destroy them, that had cost so many lives, that had pushed them to the brink of extinction, was over. Ended in minutes by a being who treated reality-altering power like a mildly interesting party trick. Gimli found his voice first. "Lad," he said to Legolas, "I don't think we're going to have problems with Saruman anymore." "No," Legolas agreed, his elven eyes tracking the fleeing Uruk-hai army. "But I suspect we're going to have entirely new problems. Ones that involve keeping a god entertained while he's stranded in our world." Gandalf leaned heavily on his staff, calculating. A being of immense power, displaced from his universe, with casual destructive capacity that exceeded anything Middle-earth had seen since the First Age. And according to his own words, he was merely looking for a way home. But until that home could be found, Thor of Asgard was now variable in the war against Sauron. A variable that Gandalf suspected would either save them all or complicate matters in ways the White Council had never imagined. "Come," Gandalf said to Thor, gesturing toward the stairs leading down into the fortress. "Let us find you food and begin explanations. You've questions about Middle-earth, and He smiled slightly. "I have quite a few questions about these 9 realms and the gods of Asgard." "Fair trade," Thor agreed, following the wizard. "Though I should warn you, the explanation of the World Tree and Yggdrasil's connection to universal structure takes several hours. Do you have that much time? Or are there more armies I need to disperse first?" In Isengard, Saruman felt the disruption through his palantir, a power that made his enhanced perception recoil, that registered on magical senses as something fundamentally wrong with reality. His perfect army, his genetically crafted warriors scattered by something that shouldn't exist. The White Wizard's hands trembled as he severed the connection. Whatever had arrived at Helm's Deep, it wasn't from Middle-earth. And if he couldn't control it, he needed to contact Sauron immediately. In Mordor, the eye turned westward. Sauron, ancient and powerful, felt the ripple of divine energy that had no place in Arda. New variables, unexpected factors. The meticulous plans of millennia suddenly uncertain. The Dark Lord smiled without humor. Let this Thor reveal himself. Let him show his allegiances. Every powerful being could be corrupted, controlled, or destroyed. Sauron had conquered gods before. He would do so again. But neither Ancient Wizard nor Dark Lord understood what they were facing. Thor Odinson was not merely powerful. He was the son of Odin, raised in Asgard, trained by warriors who measured their experience in millennia. He had fought alongside the Avengers, battled Hela, the goddess of death, and wielded power that could shatter continents. More importantly, he was stranded, annoyed, and hadn't eaten in several hours. Middle-earth was about to discover that gods from other universes played by very different rules. The Feast of Explanations. The Great Hall of Helm's Deep, designed for Rohan's warriors to celebrate victories and mourn losses, had never hosted quite this combination of guests. Thor sat at the head of the table, working through his third roasted pig with the methodical efficiency of someone whose metabolism operated on divine principles. Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Gandalf occupied the other seats, watching this display with varying levels of fascination and concern. "This is excellent," Thor announced, tearing into another haunch of meat. "Primitive cooking methods granted, but the basics are solid. Salt, fire, meat. You can't go wrong with the fundamentals." He paused mid-bite. "Though I must ask, do you people have any concept of seasoning beyond salt? In Asgard, we import spices from 7 different realms. Really? Elevates the mundane into the magnificent." "We're besieged," Gimli pointed out reasonably. "We're fortunate to have meat at all." "Fair point." Thor consumed the rest of the pig in 4 enormous bites, bones crunching like crackers. "Now then, Wizard Gandalf, you promised explanations. I've helped you win your siege, quite handily if I say so myself, so it's time you told me exactly where I am, who the major powers are, and whether anyone in this universe has the faintest idea how to open dimensional portals." Gandalf steepled his fingers, his weathered face thoughtful. "Very well. I'll start at the beginning, though I warn you, the history of Middle-earth is long and complex." "I'm 1,500 years old," Thor replied. "I have time." Every human at the table blinked. Even Legolas looked impressed. 1,500 years was young by elven standards, but ancient by nearly every other measure. "Right," Gandalf said, recalibrating. "Then I'll provide the essential history. In the beginning, Eru Ilúvatar, the One, the Creator, sang the world into existence through the great music. He created the Ainur, spiritual beings who helped shape reality. Some of these Ainur entered the world and became known as the Valar and Maiar, powerful entities who govern and guide Middle-earth's development." Thor frowned. "So they're gods." "Not gods," Gandalf corrected firmly. "Servants of the One. There is only one true creator in Arda." "Semantics," Thor waved dismissively. "In my experience, any sufficiently powerful being gets called a god by someone. Continue." Gandalf's eye twitched. Being casual about theology was apparently universal among powerful beings. But he pressed on. "Among the Maiar were beings of great power. Some, like myself, were sent to Middle-earth to guide the free peoples against darkness. Others..." His expression darkened. "Others fell into shadow. Sauron was once a Maia of great skill, a craftsman and strategist. But he was corrupted by Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, and learned to pour his malice into the works of his hands." "Sounds familiar," Thor muttered. "We had someone similar. Surtur, demon of fire, built his entire realm on corruption and destruction. I killed him, eventually." "One does not simply kill a Maia," Gandalf said carefully. "They're immortal spirits. At best, you can defeat their physical forms and banish their essence. Sauron has been defeated multiple times, but his spirit endures, reforming, growing in power." Thor's expression sharpened with interest. "Immortal spirits that reform after physical death? That's actually challenging. Most things I fight stay dead when killed. How does one permanently defeat such a being?" "That," Aragorn interjected, "is precisely what we're attempting." Sauron poured much of his power into a ring, the One Ring, created to control 19 other rings of power. If the One Ring is destroyed, Sauron will be diminished beyond recovery, unable to take physical form again. "So it's a Horcrux situation," Thor said, nodding. "We encountered something similar with the Infinity Stones, objects containing concentrated power that needed to be neutralized. Where is this ring currently?" The table fell silent. Gandalf studied Thor with his penetrating gaze, weighing how much to reveal to this displaced god. The ring is being carried to Mount Doom by a hobbit named Frodo Baggins, Gandalf finally said. A quest of stealth and secrecy, for the ring cannot be used. It corrupts all who wield it, bending them to Sauron's will. A hobbit? Thor looked confused. What's a hobbit? Another species I haven't encountered. Small people, Gimli supplied. About this high. He gestured to roughly chest height. Large feet, love farming and food, generally peaceful folk with no interest in adventures. You gave your universe-ending super weapon to small farmers? Thor's expression cycled between disbelief and admiration. That's either brilliant or insane. Possibly both. But it explains why you're all so concerned about this Saruman and his armies. You're buying time for the farmers to destroy the Horcrux. Essentially, yes, Gandalf confirmed. Every battle we win, every day we delay Sauron's forces gives Frodo more time to reach Mount Doom. Your intervention at Helm's Deep has bought us precious days, perhaps weeks. Thor grabbed another pig, this one barely roasted, and started eating. Right, so the stakes are: corrupted immortal spirit trying to conquer your world can only be stopped by destroying his power source, which is currently being carried by brave farmers on a stealth mission. Meanwhile, you're fighting holding actions across multiple fronts to keep attention away from said farmers. He swallowed a massive bite. That's actually solid strategy. A bit more complicated than Asgard's typical hit it with overwhelming force until it stops moving approach, but I can respect the subtlety. Legolas leaned forward, his ancient eyes curious. You speak of Asgard and these 9 realms as if traveling between worlds is common. In Middle-earth, such things are the province of the Valar alone, and even they rarely intervene directly anymore. In my universe, Thor explained, swallowing another mouthful, there are 9 realms connected by the world tree Yggdrasil. Asgard sits at the top, home of the gods, warriors, and the royal family. Then there's Midgard, home of humans, Jotunheim, home of frost giants, Vanaheim, home of the Vanir gods, Alfheim, home of the light elves. He continued listing realms while eating, barely pausing for breath. We travel between them using the Bifrost, a bridge of rainbow energy that allows instantaneous transportation. Very convenient for visiting, trade, or launching military campaigns. My friend Heimdall guards the Bifrost and can see every soul in the 9 realms. A bridge of light that spans worlds, Legolas breathed. That is beyond even the greatest works of the Noldor. The Noldor? Thor asked through a mouthful of pork. High elves, Gandalf supplied. Master craftsmen and lore masters of the First Age. They created many wonders, including the Silmarils, jewels that contained the light of the 2 trees of Valinor. Jewels containing primordial light. Thor perked up. We have something similar. The ether, though calling it a jewel is generous, more of a weapon really. It can convert matter to dark matter. My brother's girlfriend got possessed by it once. Very awkward family dinner afterward. The table stared at Thor, trying to process this casual mention of reality-warping artifacts and possessed dinner guests. Your universe sounds chaotic, Aragorn said carefully. You have no idea, Thor agreed cheerfully. Just last month before I got yanked here, I fought my sister. She's the goddess of death, broke my hammer, killed most of Asgard's warriors, and I had to unleash Surtur to destroy our entire realm to stop her. Silence. You destroyed your own home? Gimli asked quietly. Thor's cheerful expression faded, replaced by something older and sadder. Asgard isn't a place, it's a people. My father taught me that before he died. The realm can burn as long as the people survive. He shook his head. But that's my burden to bear. Point is, I'm familiar with apocalyptic scenarios and impossible choices. Your situation with Sauron and this ring. I understand those stakes. Gandalf studied Thor with new appreciation. Beneath the bombast and casual godly arrogance was a warrior who'd made the hardest decisions, who understood sacrifice. Perhaps this displacement was more than cosmic accident. Thor of Asgard, Gandalf said formally, you arrived at Helm's Deep by chance, pulled through dimensional barriers by forces neither of us understand. But I begin to wonder if some greater design guides these events. You possess power that could turn the tide of this war. Would you consider joining our cause? Not as servant or subject, but as ally in the fight against Sauron? Thor set down the remnants of his meal, his expression thoughtful. Wizard, I appreciate the offer, but I need to be clear about something. I don't belong in this universe. My responsibilities, my people, my duties, they're all in my reality. The Avengers are probably wondering where I went. Heimdall is certainly panicking, and my brother Loki. He grimaced. Loki is either trying to find me or taking advantage of my absence to cause mischief. Possibly both. However, Thor continued, his tone shifting to determination, I'm not heartless. You've shown me hospitality, explained your situation, and I do owe you for information about this universe. More importantly, his eyes flickered with lightning. I really truly dislike tyrants who use fear and conquest to subjugate free people. Had enough of that with my sister. He stood, Mjolnir appearing in his hand with a crack of thunder. So here's my proposal. I'll help you fight Sauron while I search for a way home. I'll lend my strength to your battles, protect your people where I can, and do my part to buy time for your farmers to destroy that ring. In exchange, you help me research dimensional travel, magical artifacts, or anything else that might open a path back to the Nine Realms. Aragorn stood as well, offering his hand. That is more than fair, Thor of Asgard. Your strength alone could save thousands of lives. If there's any knowledge in Middle-earth that can return you home, we will find it. They clasped forearms, and for a moment the King of Gondor and the God of Thunder stood as equals, warriors recognizing each other across the void between universes. Excellent. Thor's mood shifted back to cheerful. Now that's settled, I need to understand your enemy better. This Saruman, the one who sent the army I scattered. Where is he based? And more importantly, can he create more armies, or did I just solve your military problem permanently? Gimli laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Lad, you destroyed one army. Saruman has Isengard, a fortress that's been breeding Uruk-hai for months, and beyond him is Sauron, with forces numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Orcs, trolls, Nazgul, and things we don't have names for. Nazgul? Thor's interest sharpened. The Nine, Gandalf explained. Once they were men, great kings who accepted rings of power from Sauron. The rings granted them immortality but enslaved them to his will. Now they're wraiths, neither living nor dead, riding fell beasts and spreading terror. They cannot be permanently killed by normal weapons, only delayed. Immortal wraiths bound to a master, riding monsters, spreading fear. Thor nodded slowly. That's actually creative evil. We have something similar. Draugr, though they're less organized. These Nazgul, they can be fought. Fought, yes, defeated temporarily, Aragorn confirmed. But they reform unless you destroy the 9 rings binding them, and those rings are under Sauron's control. Challenge accepted, Thor declared. I've fought worse. The Chitauri invasion involved thousands of alien warriors pouring through a portal above New York. We stopped them by destroying the portal and nuking their command ship. Similar principle here. Cut off the head, the body dies. Except, Legolas pointed out carefully, we cannot simply assault Mordor directly. Sauron's forces are too vast. Any army we send would be destroyed before reaching Mount Doom. That's why the ring must be delivered secretly. Thor frowned, clearly uncomfortable with stealth-based strategies. So I can't just fly to Mordor, smash my way through whatever defenses exist, and destroy this ring personally? The ring would corrupt you, Gandalf said flatly. It twists the desires of whoever holds it, making them believe they can wield its power for good while actually serving Sauron. The stronger the bearer, the faster the corruption. Someone with your power. He shook his head. You would become a threat worse than Sauron within days. Thor absorbed this with uncharacteristic seriousness. Insidious. We have weapons like that in the Nine Realms. The Infinity Stones can corrupt users if they're not careful. Very well, I'll stay away from the ring. But that doesn't mean I can't help elsewhere. If I can't fight the final battle, I'll make sure your farmers reach it alive by crushing every army that stands in the way. That, Aragorn said with the first genuine smile since the siege began, would be invaluable. Rohan's forces are scattered and depleted. Gondor faces assault from multiple directions. If you could help defend key location... Consider them defended, Thor interrupted. Just point me at the enemies and stand back. I've gotten very good at the overwhelming force approach. A distant horn echoed across the valley. All heads turned toward the windows where dawn light revealed riders approaching. Not Uruk-hai, but horses bearing the white standard of Rohan. Éomer, Aragorn said with relief. He must have rallied forces from across Rohan. They rushed to the walls where hundreds of Rohirrim were approaching, led by a warrior in fine armor. But as Éomer's forces drew closer, they slowed, their expressions shifting from determination to confusion as they took in the battlefield. Where there should have been enemy siege lines, there was only scorched earth and glass craters. Where there should have been Uruk-hai corpses by the thousands, there were only ash piles. The great siege that had threatened to destroy Helm's Deep looked like it had been interrupted by divine lightning storm, which, technically, it had been. Éomer rode through the shattered gates, his eyes scanning the destruction with a warrior's assessment. When he spotted Aragorn on the wall, he called up, "What happened here? The scouts reported a siege. This looks like..." He gestured helplessly at the devastation. Like the wrath of the Valar themselves struck down Saruman's army. "Close enough," Thor called down cheerfully, floating over the battlements to land beside Éomer's horse. The animal whinnied and tried to bolt, sensing predator instincts that transcended species. Thor steadied it with one hand, the horse immediately calming despite its terror. "I'm Thor. I arrived unexpectedly, broke your siege, and ate your food. Nice to meet you." Éomer stared up at the armored figure who'd just made his trained warhorse nearly collapse from instinctive fear. What are you?" "God of Thunder, actually. From another universe. Long story involving temporal magic and dimensional tears. The important part is I'm helping defend Middle-earth while I figure out how to get home." Thor released the horse and gestured at the battlefield. "You're welcome for the siege thing, by the way. Those Uruk-hai were quite aggressive." The Rohirrim riders murmured among themselves, hands on weapons, uncertain whether this strange warrior was threat or ally. Éomer looked to Aragorn for guidance. "He speaks truth," Aragorn called down. "Thor arrived during the siege and scattered Saruman's forces single-handedly. He's offered to aid us against Sauron while seeking a path back to his own realm." Single-handedly. Éomer dismounted, approaching Thor with a warrior's caution. He was tall by the standards of men, hardened by battle, nephew to the king. But standing before Thor, he felt like a child confronting a thunderstorm-given form. You defeated 10,000 Uruk-hai alone? I've defeated worse, Thor replied honestly. Though to be fair, your Uruk-hai are quite weak by my universe's standards. The average Asgardian warrior could probably handle 5 or 6 before getting tired. I'm substantially above average, he smiled. No offense to your local monsters. They're probably quite fearsome to people who aren't gods. Gimli's laughter boomed from the wall. I like this one. Fights like a dwarf, drinks like a dwarf. Probably eats like a dwarf, judging by the empty feast hall. I heard that, Thor called back. And I eat more than a dwarf, I'll have you know. It's divine metabolism, burns through calories like wildfire through dry grass. Despite the tension, despite the exhaustion of siege and war, laughter rippled through the defenders. This strange god warrior who'd arrived from nowhere had not only saved them but was proving remarkably personable. Not aloof or distant like the valor of legend, but crude and cheerful and entirely too comfortable with violence. Eomer found himself grinning despite the situation. Well, Thor of Asgard, if you're willing to fight beside Rohan, we welcome your strength. Though I warn you, we ride to Gondor next. Sauron's forces march on Minas Tirith, and we must answer their call for aid. Gondor? Thor looked to Aragorn for clarification. The greatest kingdom of men, Aragorn explained, descending from the wall. My birthright, though that's a discussion for later. Sauron will assault it with everything he has. Perhaps 200,000 orcs, trolls, siege engines, and the Nazgul. It will be the greatest battle of this age. Thor's eyes lit up with warriors' excitement. 200,000 enemies? Now that sounds like a proper fight. When do we leave? At dawn tomorrow, Eomer said. My riders need rest and your defenders need time to recover from the siege. Excellent. That gives me time to sleep, eat more, and learn about these Nazgul. Thor turned to Gandalf, who joined them in the courtyard. Wizard, you mentioned they ride monsters. What kind of monsters? Dragon-sized? Planet-sized? Give me scale so I know how hard to hit them. Fell beasts, Gandalf replied. Creatures of wing and terror, perhaps 30 feet from nose to tail. The Nazgul themselves wield dark magic and weapons that can kill with despair before ever drawing blood. So psychological warfare combined with physical threat. Interesting tactic. Thor nodded approvingly. We had similar enemies. The mindless ones, creatures that could break morals through psionic attacks. The key is mental resistance and hitting them really, really hard before they can establish their terror aura. He looked around at the assembled warriors. Rohirrim, refugees from the Hornburg, defenders who'd survived the siege. All of them exhausted, many wounded, but alive because a god had stumbled into their battle. Listen up! Thor's voice carried across the courtyard without needing to shout, divine authority making even whispers audible. I'm new to your world, and I'll probably make mistakes about your customs and politics. But I know war, and I know how to win battles. If you'll follow me to Gondor, I promise you this. No force in Middle-earth will stand against us, not Saruman, not Sauron, not these Nazgul. We'll break their armies, save your city, and buy your farmers enough time to finish their mission. He raised Mjolnir, and lightning flickered around it like a halo. I'm Thor, son of Odin, god of thunder, and I don't lose battles. So rest, heal, prepare yourselves. Tomorrow we ride to war, and Middle-earth is about to learn that gods from other universes play by very different rules. Thunder rumbled overhead, punctuating his words with divine emphasis. The warriors cheered, not the desperate cheer of those facing doom, but the triumphant roar of those who suddenly believed victory possible. Only Gandalf remained quiet, his ancient eyes troubled. He recognized the pattern, a powerful being arriving at a crucial moment, promising salvation through strength, inspiring hope through displays of divine might. History warned against such moments. The Valor themselves had learned that intervention, even with best intentions, could twist fate in unexpected ways. But they needed Thor's strength. The war against Sauron demanded every advantage. Gandalf just hoped that when this was over, when Thor found his way home, Middle-earth wouldn't have traded one problem for another. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. The march to Gondor dawn broke over Rohan with unusual clarity. The storm clouds that had gathered during Thor's arrival had dispersed, leaving skies so blue they seemed painted by optimistic artists rather than nature. 6,000 Rohirrim assembled in the valley below Helm's Deep, the largest cavalry force the kingdom could muster on short notice, and floating above them all, clearly visible against the morning sky, was Thor. "Does he have to do that?" Eomer muttered, adjusting his horse's bridle while trying not to look directly at the god casually defying gravity 50 feet overhead. "It's unnatural." "He's establishing presence," Aragorn observed, checking Andúral's straps. "Making sure every rider knows they have divine support. It's actually sound psychological tactics." "It's showing off," Gimli corrected, loading his axes onto a supply horse. "Not that I disapprove, mind you. If you can fly and summon lightning, might as well let people know about it." Legolas, standing perfectly still in that unnerving elven way, watched Thor with ancient curiosity. "He moves through the air as naturally as we walk Earth. No spell, no visible mechanism, simply defiance of gravity itself." "I can hear you," Thor called down cheerfully. "And for the record, I'm not defying gravity, I'm just stronger than gravity is insistent. There's a difference." He descended in a controlled spiral, landing with cat-like grace despite his bulk. "Besides, I wanted to scout the route to Gondor. Make sure no ambushes await us." "And?" Eomer asked, mounting his horse. "Clear path for at least 50 miles. After that, I spotted some orc bands, maybe 1,000 total, moving south. Probably reinforcements for this Sauron's big assault. I can clear them out if you'd like." "We can handle 1,000 orcs," Eomer said with warrior's pride. "Save your strength for Minas Tirith." "As you wish," Thor shrugged. "Though saving strength is sort of relative when you're a god. It's like asking me to save my breath. Technically possible, practically unnecessary." Gandalf emerged from Helm's Deep riding Shadowfax, the lord of all horses. Even that legendary steed snorted nervously as Thor approached, though it held its ground better than common horses. "The ride to Gondor will take 3 days at full march," Gandalf announced to the assembled leaders. "We must ride hard and fast, every hour counts." 3 days? Thor looked puzzled. "I could fly there in what, 30 minutes? Maybe an hour if I took the scenic route." "You could," Gandalf agreed carefully. "But these warriors cannot. We ride together, or we don't ride at all. An army requires cohesion, not just raw power." Thor absorbed this with visible frustration. Speed was his preference. Identify problem, fly to problem, solve problem with application of hammer. This ride for 3 days with slower allies' approach violated every instinct. But Aragorn had explained Middle-earth's approach to warfare. Armies moved together, fought together, won together. Heroes might accomplish miracles, but wars were won by coordinated forces. "Fine," Thor conceded. "I'll fly ahead periodically to scout, but I'll stay with the main force. Though I'm warning you now, if we encounter that 1,000 orc band I mentioned, I'm not going to just ride past them. That's wasteful." "Deal," Eomer said, signaling his riders to mount. "Riders of Rohan, We ride for Gondor, for Theoden King. For Theoden King. 6,000 voices answered as one. The cavalry began moving, a river of horseflesh and steel flowing east. Thor floated alongside, adjusting his speed to match their pace, slower than walking for someone accustomed to lightning-fast travel, but he'd promised to stay with the army. As they rode, Legolas maneuvered his horse beside Thor. A question, if I may. You speak of flying between realms, of cosmic bridges and dimension-spanning magic. In your universe, is such travel common? Depends on your species and resources, Thor replied, pleased to have conversation to distract from the tedious pace. Asgardians use the Bifrost routinely. It's like, imagine if you had a horse that could instantly transport you anywhere you wanted. That's the Bifrost, except instead of a horse, it's a rainbow bridge powered by cosmic energy. And others? The humans of your Midgard? Humans in my universe are more advanced than here. They've built flying machines, communication devices, weapons that can level cities. Some have even begun exploring other worlds using primitive spacecraft. Thor noticed Legolas's skeptical expression. I know it sounds impossible, but Midgard's humans are quite inventive. Less magical than Middle-earth perhaps, but more technological. Machines that fly, Gimli interjected from his position on a particularly sturdy pony. Without magic or divine power? How? Engineering, understanding natural forces and harnessing them. Midgard humans discovered that certain shapes moving through air at sufficient speed can create lift. So they built metal birds with engines that push them forward fast enough to stay aloft. Thor saw their confused expressions and simplified. They tricked wind itself into carrying weight. Very clever, actually. And they fight with these flying machines? Aragorn asked, professional curiosity overcoming skepticism. Sometimes. They also fight with projectile weapons that use controlled explosions to launch metal at incredible speeds. And occasionally they develop weapons so destructive they can destroy entire cities in single strikes. Thor's expression darkened. Though they've learned, mostly, that some weapons are too terrible to use. The concept of weapons too terrible to use silenced the group. In Middle-earth, where warfare involves swords, spears, and occasionally catapults, the idea of city-destroying single strikes was beyond comprehension. Your universe sounds dangerous, Legolas said quietly. It is, but it's also wondrous. I've walked on worlds made entirely of water, fought beside heroes who have no divine power but possess courage that shames gods. Seen stars being born and civilizations rising from nothing. Thor smiled with genuine fondness. For all its dangers, it's home, and I miss it terribly. That admission, raw and honest, reminded everyone that this powerful being was also displaced, separated from everything familiar. It created unexpected sympathy. We'll help you find your way back, Aragorn promised, after we deal with Sauron. After, Thor agreed, which reminds me, this Sauron. I understand he's an immortal spirit who poured his power into a ring, but what's he actually like? Personality? Tactics? Weaknesses? Gandalf, who'd been riding silently and listening, spoke up. Sauron is patient. He thinks in centuries, not years. Every move is calculated, every army positioned with strategic precision. He corrupts through promises of power, enslaves through magical domination, and destroys those who cannot be turned. So he's a tactician, not just a brute, Thor observed. That's actually more dangerous. We have someone similar, Thanos, a titan who believed he could save the universe by killing half of all life. Collected the Infinity Stones to do it, nearly succeeded. He paused. We stopped him, but it cost us dearly. You fought someone who tried to kill half the universe? Gimli's eyes were wide. And won? Eventually, it took everything we had and we lost friends in the process. Thor's voice carried weight of old grief. Victory sometimes comes with terrible price. But the alternative, allowing tyrants to succeed, is always worse. They rode in contemplative silence for several miles, each processing this glimpse into a universe with stakes beyond their imagination. Around midday, scouts returned with urgent news. Orcs ahead, perhaps 1,500 marching south in battle formation. Thor perked up immediately. Excellent. I was getting bored. Ymir, how do you want to handle this? The Marshal of Rohan considered tactics. Against 1,500 orcs, his cavalry would win, but with significant casualties. Every rider lost was one fewer at Gondor, but if Thor... Can you scatter them? Ymir asked. Without killing all of them? If some flee back to Isengard, they'll carry tales of divine fury. Fear is a weapon too. Thor grinned wolfishly. I like how you think. Terror tactics. Make the survivors spread word that attacking Rohan means facing godly wrath. Excellent strategy. He cracked his knuckles, lightning sparking between his fingers. Watch and learn. This is called proportional response. He flew forward, accelerating to speeds that blurred his form. Within seconds, he was hovering above the orc column, clearly visible against the afternoon sky. The orcs spotted him immediately. Shouts of alarm rippled through their ranks. Crude bows were raised, crossbows loaded. A few particularly brave or stupid orcs threw spears. Thor caught a spear mid-flight, examined it critically, then tossed it back with casual force. The weapon traveled so fast it became a streak of metal, punching through 6 orcs before embedding itself in a boulder 100 yards beyond. Orcs of Isengard! Thor's voice boomed across the plain. I am Thor, god of thunder. I have broken Saruman's siege. I have scattered his armies, and now I offer you a choice. He raised Mjolnir, and storm clouds began forming. Not the massive tempest of Helm's Deep, but localized and controlled. Flee now, return to your holes, and spread word that Middle-earth is under divine protection, or stay and face the fury of Asgard. To emphasize his point, Thor struck the ground ahead of the orc column with a lightning bolt. The impact created a crater 20 feet across and showered the front ranks with molten earth. Orcs, despite their breeding for violence, possessed survival instincts. Faced with a being who commanded lightning and carved craters with gestures, their options were clear. They ran. Not in organized retreat, pure panicked flight. Weapons were dropped. Formation collapsed. The 1,500 orc column dissolved into terrified individuals fleeing in every direction. Their only goal to put distance between themselves and the flying god thing. Thor watched them scatter with satisfaction, then returned to the Rohirrim column. Problem solved, he announced cheerfully. They'll spread stories about Rohan's divine protector. Should make other orc bands think twice before attacking. Ymir stared at the fleeing orcs, then at Thor, then back at the orcs. You just routed 1,500 warriors without killing any of them. Well, I killed 6 with that spear toss, Thor corrected. And the lightning probably caught a few unlucky ones. But mostly, yes, psychological warfare. Why waste energy fighting when you can just scare them into running? In 3,000 years of fighting orcs, Legolas said slowly, I have never seen them flee without striking a blow. They're bred for courage in battle. They're bred for violence, not stupidity, Thor countered. Even the most aggressive warrior knows when they're outmatched. I just made the power differential very clear. Gandalf chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. You're wasting your talents as a warrior, Thor. You should have been a general. That display was masterful. Intimidation through overwhelming force demonstration, minimal casualties, maximum psychological impact. I've led armies before, Thor admitted. usually on Vanaheim or during inter-realm skirmishes, but honestly, I prefer direct combat. All this strategic thinking makes my head hurt. Give me a clear enemy and let me hit them. That's proper warfare. The column resumed its march, spirits lifted by the casual display of power. Where before they'd been grim warriors riding to probable death, now they felt like part of something greater. With Thor flying overhead, even the impossible seemed achievable. Over the next 3 days, they encountered 7 more orc bands. Each time, Thor offered the same choice: flee or fight. 6 bands fled after minimal demonstration. The 7th, led by a particularly stubborn orc chieftain, chose to fight. Thor obliged them. The battle lasted 30 seconds and resulted in 0 Rohirrim casualties. By the time they approached Gondor's borders, Thor's name had spread across every orc camp in the region. The Sindarin elves called him Thorian, the Storm Lord. The orcs had less poetic names, mostly variations on the flying death thing and demon who throws lightning. On the evening of the 3rd day, they crested a rise and saw it. Minas Tirith, the white city of Gondor. 7 levels of white stone climbing the mountainside, crowned by the citadel and the White Tower. Even from 20 miles away, its grandeur was evident. Thor whistled appreciatively. Now that's a fortress. Defensible position, multiple fallback points, excellent sight lines. Your people build well. It stood for thousands of years, Aragorn said with undisguised pride. And it will stand against Sauron's assault, it must. But even as he spoke, they all saw it. The black smudge on the eastern horizon. Not clouds, armies. Vast forces moving toward the White City like locusts converging on prey. How many? Éomer asked quietly. Legolas's elven eyes were better suited to distance. He stared for a long moment, counting, calculating. More than I can easily number, perhaps 200,000. Orcs, certainly, trolls, siege engines. And his expression tightened. Fell beasts, at least a dozen circling above their vanguard. The Nazgul, Gandalf confirmed. All 9 are there. They'll lead the assault. Thor studied the approaching army with professional interest. 200,000. That's substantial. Not the biggest army I've faced. The Chitauri invasion involved millions, but respectable. And these Nazgul, they're the immortal Wraith Riders you mentioned? They are, Gandalf confirmed. And they're far more dangerous than orcs. Their mere presence spreads terror. Strong men have died of fear before Nazgul even drew their blades. Challenge accepted, Thor said calmly. I'll handle the Nazgul personally. You all focus on the army itself. Thor, Aragorn placed a hand on the god's armored shoulder. Don't underestimate them. They've existed for millennia. They've killed countless heroes. And I'm a god, Thor replied simply. I appreciate the concern truly, but I've fought undead demons, alien warlords, and my own sister, who was literally the goddess of death. 9 flying wraiths aren't going to intimidate me. He looked at the assembled forces, 6,000 Rohirrim, exhausted but determined. Here's the plan. You all ride for the city, reinforce whatever forces are already defending. I'll fly ahead, engage the Nazgul, and thin out their air support. Once you're inside the walls, we'll coordinate defense and make sure Sauron's armies break themselves against Gondor's gates. You're going alone? Gimli protested. Against 200,000 enemies? Against the Nazgul, Thor corrected. The army can wait. Priority targets first. Take out enemy leadership and air superiority, then grind down the foot soldiers. Basic tactics. Éomer wanted to protest. No warrior, however skilled, engaged an entire army solo. But Thor wasn't a warrior by Middle-earth standards. He was a god from another universe, and he'd spent 3 days proving that their rules didn't apply to him. Go, Aragorn decided. We'll reach the city and prepare defenses. Try not to destroy too much of the army. We'll need enemies left to fight." Thor grinned. "I'll leave you some. But those Nazgul, they're mine." He shot into the sky like a lightning bolt in reverse, accelerating to speeds that turned him into a blur. Within seconds, he was a dot against the darkening sky, arrowing toward the vast army approaching Minas Tirith. Gandalf watched him go, then turned to the riders. "We must ride now at full speed. If Thor engages the Nazgul, it will be a battle like none Middle-earth has witnessed. We need to be inside the walls before whatever happens. Ride!" Eomer shouted. "Ride for Gondor! Ride for ruin and the world's ending! Death! Death!" the Rohirrim answered, spurring their horses into full gallop. Behind them, thunder rumbled, not from clouds but from the direction Thor had flown. Lightning flickered in unnatural patterns. The Battle of Gondor was about to begin, and for the first time in Middle-earth's history, a god from another universe was going to war. The Nazgul's mistake. The Witch King of Angmar had existed for over 4,000 years. Once a great king of men, now the greatest of the Nazgul, Lord of the Nine, chief servant of Sauron. He had broken the North Kingdom of Arnor. He had slain the last king of Gondor's line, or so he believed. He had led armies that made nations tremble. He feared nothing. Fear was for the living. But as something approached from the west at impossible speed, trailing lightning and thunder, the Witch King felt something he hadn't experienced in millennia. Uncertainty. "What is that?" His lieutenant, Khamul the Easterling, rasped in the black speech. The Nazgul's fell beast, a creature of leathery wings and fangs, shrieked nervously. "I don't know," the Witch King admitted, his voice like wind through graves. "But it radiates power that does not belong in Middle-earth." The approaching figure resolved into clarity. A warrior in armor that seemed to drink starlight, carrying a hammer that crackled with barely contained lightning. He flew, not on wings, but through pure defiance of natural law, and his eyes blazed with divine fury. Thor stopped approximately 100 feet from the leading Nazgul, hovering in mid-air as if standing on invisible ground. He studied the nine with the interest of a predator encountering new prey. "So," Thor said conversationally, his voice carrying clearly despite wind and distance. "You're the Nazgul, the terror of Middle-earth, the immortal Wraith Riders who spread fear and death." He tilted his head. "I expected you to be taller." The Witch King drew his sword, a blade forged in Sauron's workshops, inscribed with spells to kill not just flesh, but spirit itself. "You dare mock us, creature? We are the Nine, the servants of the Great Eye, the bringers of—" Yeah, Thor interrupted. "Servants of evil, spreaders of fear, immortal warriors, heard it all before. I've fought similar enemies. They died." He raised Mjolnir casually. "You're going to as well. Well, die is maybe the wrong term since you're already technically dead. Be destroyed? Cease existing? What's the correct terminology for killing immortal wraiths?" Khamul hissed from beside his leader. "This one mocks death itself. Lord, perhaps we should—" "Attack!" the Witch King commanded, and all 9 Nazgul spurred their fell beasts forward. In perfect formation, they descended on Thor from multiple angles, swords raised, dark magic swirling around them. Their aura of terror preceded them, a psychic assault designed to paralyze enemies with dread before blades even struck. Men had died from that aura alone, hearts stopping from pure fear. Thor yawned. "Is something supposed to be happening?" he asked as the Nazgul closed. "Because I'm feeling—" "Nothing? Your terror aura is very underwhelming. We have creatures in hell, that's our underworld, who do fear much better. Really get into your head, show you your worst nightmares. This is just sort of—" he waved dismissively. "Mild unpleasantness?" The Witch King's first sword strike was perfect. Millennia of combat experience channeled into one blow, aimed at Thor's throat, backed by dark magic that could sever souls. Thor caught the blade between two fingers. "Interesting weapon," Thor observed, holding the sword that should have killed him with casual grip. The dark magic flickered against his hand, trying to find purchase on his divine essence. Failing completely. Enchanted for soul severing, if I'm reading the spell work correctly. Nasty piece of magic. Wouldn't work on mortals though, they lack the spiritual density to resist. But on a god, he squeezed slightly. The sword shattered. 4,000 years of dark craftsmanship, centuries of accumulated curses and death magic, reduced to fragments by pressure between thumb and forefinger. "Oops," Thor said insincerely. The Nazgul's coordinated attack fell apart as they processed what they'd just witnessed. Their leader's weapon, a blade that had killed heroes, broken armies, ended dynasties, destroyed like glass. "My turn," Thor announced. He swung Mjolnir. The hammer didn't even touch the Witch King. It passed within 3 feet, and the shockwave alone launched the Nazgul and his fell beast tumbling through the sky like leaves in a hurricane. The Wraith King's armor crumpled, his fell beast's wings snapped. They crashed into the orc army below, carving a crater through ranks of shocked soldiers. "1," Thor counted cheerfully, then turned to the remaining 8. "Who's next?" Khamul made a decision born of 4,000 years of survival instincts. Retreat was not cowardice against an impossible foe. He turned his fell beast to flee. Thor pointed Mjolnir at him. Lightning erupted from the hammer in a precise strike that hit the Nazgul dead center. The Wraith screamed, a sound of genuine pain, something it hadn't felt since becoming immortal. Its fell beast was incinerated instantly. Khamul himself, being immortal, spirit couldn't be killed by the lightning, but he could be hurt, badly. The Nazgul fell from the sky, his wraith form flickering, barely maintaining cohesion. He would survive, eventually, but not soon. 2! Thor continued his count. 7 to go, come on, don't make this boring. The remaining Nazgul exchanged glances. They had fought for millennia. They had faced armies, heroes, wizards. They knew when a battle could be won and when it was suicide. This was suicide. As one, they turned their fell beasts and fled, not toward Minas Tirith, but away, scattering in different directions. 4,000 years of pride and terror, undone by 30 seconds of fighting a being they couldn't comprehend. Thor watched them flee with disappointment. Really? You're the great terror of Middle-earth and you run after losing too? He called after them. I'm not even at full power. This is like casual fighting strength for me. But the Nazgul were gone, their fell beasts carrying them away at maximum speed. In the army below, confusion rippled. The Nazgul, their immortal commanders, their source of terror and discipline, had just fled from a single opponent. Thor descended slowly toward the orc army, landing on a small rise that gave him clear view of the assembled forces. 200,000 orcs, trolls, and other servants of Sauron stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning terror. Right, Thor said loudly, his voice carrying across the battlefield through divine authority. Who's in charge now that the Wraith Riders fled? An orc chieftain, larger than his fellows and wearing crude armor, stepped forward. He carried a massive sword and had the scars of 100 battles. I am Gorbag, War Master of the Black Gate. The 9 may have fled your strangeness, but we do not fear. Thor threw Mjolnir. The hammer covered the distance faster than I could follow. It struck Gorbag dead center, continued through the orc chieftain, through 6 orcs behind him, through a siege tower, and finally embedded itself in a boulder 100 yards beyond before returning to Thor's hand. Anyone else want to make speeches about not fearing me? Thor asked pleasantly. Silence. 200,000 warriors bred for violence and conquest, stood frozen by the casual destruction of their war master. "That's what I thought," Thor continued. "Now here's what's going to happen. You have two choices. Turn around, march back to Mordor, and tell Sauron that Middle-earth has divine protection now. Or continue toward that city," he pointed at Minas Tirith, "and face me in battle." He raised Mjolnir, and storm clouds began forming overhead. Not natural clouds, these moved with purpose, swirling into position directly above the army. I should mention I'm being very generous here. In my universe, armies that serve evil tyrants don't get warnings. They get obliterated. But your Gandalf asked me to show restraint, so I'm offering you a choice. Lightning flickered in the clouds, each bolt precisely positioned above concentrations of troops. The message was clear. Thor could end this entire army whenever he wanted. An orc captain in the rear ranks made a decision. He turned and ran, then another, then 10, then 100. "Do not flee," a troll war chief bellowed, trying to maintain order. "We are 200,000 strong. He is one." Thor's lightning struck the troll, not to kill, just to hurt. The creature collapsed, smoking, very much alive but in tremendous pain. "I'm one god," Thor corrected. "There's a difference, and I've destroyed larger armies. So again, retreat or fight. Choose now." The army began to disintegrate, not all at once. Some orcs held formation, pride, or orders keeping them steady. But enough broke that the rot spread. Within minutes, a third of the army was fleeing east. Then something changed. A presence made itself known. Not physical, spiritual. A vast ancient consciousness that had been observing through the army's commanders, weighing this new variable. Sauron. The remaining orcs froze, their retreat halted by will not their own. They turned in perfect unison to face Thor, their expressions now blank, puppets controlled by distant master. A voice spoke through 1,000 mouths simultaneously, echoing across the plain. "God of another universe, I am Sauron. You intrude on my dominion." Thor's expression sharpened. "Finally, the actual boss shows up. I was wondering when you'd make an appearance." "You possess power that does not belong in Arda," Sauron's voice continued, distorted by being channeled through so many throats. "Yet you are here, and you oppose me. Foolish. I have conquered gods before." "Yeah, so have I," Thor replied calmly. "I've fought my sister, who's the goddess of death. I've battled alongside the Avengers against Thanos, who wielded Infinity Stones. I've destroyed Surtur's realm to save my people. What have you done lately besides hide in a tower and manipulate jewelry?" A ripple of rage passed through the possessed army. "You mock that which you do not understand. I am eternal. I shaped the rings of power. I commanded the forces of Morgoth. I are a talking spirit who needs a ring to maintain physical form," Thor interrupted. "I've read up on you over the past 3 days. Dark Lord, corruption specialist, really into the whole dominate all life thing. Very unoriginal. We have dozens like you in my universe." "Then let me show you," Sauron hissed, "why I have endured through ages when gods have fallen." The possessed army charged as one, not with battle cries or organization, but as a single organism controlled by one vast intelligence. 70,000 orcs moving in perfect coordination, directed by a mind that had commanded armies for millennia. Thor sighed. "I tried diplomacy. Remember that when explaining to your master why his army didn't reach Gondor." He raised Mjolnir to the sky and called the storm. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a natural disaster. Lightning fell in sheets, each bolt precisely targeted by Thor's divine will. Siege towers exploded into splinters, trolls were flash-fried where they stood, concentrated orc formations were carved apart by systematic strikes that eliminated hundreds per second. Thor himself moved through the army like death incarnate. Mjolnir crushed everything it touched. Lightning erupted from his body in waves. Where he walked, the earth itself fractured from the power radiating through him. Orcs tried to swarm him, Sauron's control driving them forward despite terror. They might as well have been swarming a hurricane. Thor spun, hammer extended, and the rotation alone created a shockwave that launched bodies hundreds of feet. "This is what gods do!" Thor roared, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "We don't hide in towers. We don't manipulate from shadows. We stand in the open and dare you to face us." A massive troll, 20 feet of muscle and rage, charged him with a club the size of a tree trunk. Thor caught the club one-handed, then used it to bat the troll itself into a siege engine 100 yards away. The impact destroyed both. "I've been polite," Thor continued, systematically destroying everything around him. "I've offered mercy. I've given choices, but you threw your armies at me like they're disposable." He slammed Mjolnir into the ground. The impact created a shockwave that radiated outward for half a mile. Every orc caught in the wave was launched airborne. Siege equipment disintegrated. The earth itself rippled like water. When the dust cleared, Thor stood in a crater 50 feet across, surrounded by devastation. The army had been reduced by half, 35,000 casualties in 5 minutes of fighting. The remaining orcs, their connection to Sauron apparently severed by the overwhelming violence, broke completely. They fled in every direction, discipline abandoned, orders forgotten. Even Dark Lord's control couldn't overcome the primal instinct to escape the walking apocalypse. Thor watched them go, breathing heavily. Not from exhaustion, gods didn't tire easily, but from the adrenaline of proper combat. This had been a real fight, or at least close to one. "Sauron!" Thor called out, knowing the Dark Lord was still watching somehow. "You've lost this army. 60,000 of your soldiers are dead or fleeing. Your Nazgûl are scattered. Your siege of Gondor is broken before it even began." He planted Mjolnir in the ground like a flag. "I'm giving you one warning, Dark Lord. Leave Gondor alone. Leave Rohan alone. Pull back your forces and wait for whatever destiny your universe has planned. Because if you don't..." Lightning crackled around him. "I'll fly to Mordor personally and tear down your tower brick by brick." Silence. Then faintly, carried on wind that wasn't quite natural. "This is not over, God of Asgard." "It never is," Thor shouted back cheerfully. "That's what makes it interesting." The presence faded, Sauron's attention withdrawing. The remaining orcs, those not dead or fleeing, stood confused like puppets whose strings had been cut. Thor addressed them directly. "Go home. You've lost. Your commanders fled, your war master is dead, your army is broken. Staying here just means you die tired. Go." They went, stumbling, confused, but moving away from Minas Tirith. Moving away from the god who destroyed them single-handedly. Thor turned toward the white city visible on the horizon. 6,000 Rohirrim would be inside by now, probably wondering what the thunder and lightning show was about. He grinned and began flying toward Gondor. Behind him, the battlefield was a testament to divine fury. Craters, scorched earth, broken siege engines, and 60,000 casualties inflicted by one warrior in 6 minutes. The Nazgûl's mistake had been attacking. Sauron's mistake had been not retreating immediately. They would both learn. Gods from other universes didn't follow Middle-earth's rules. Minas Tirith's guards had seen many things in their years of service. Orc raids, troll attacks, the occasional Nazgûl flyby that left men gibbering in terror. They had not seen a god arrive by simply flying over the walls while crackling with residual lightning and carrying a hammer that hummed with barely contained power. "Halt!" the gate captain called out, then immediately felt foolish. How did one halt someone who flew? "State your... Identify your... Who are you?" Thor landed on the first level's main courtyard, noting the 7-tiered structure with professional appreciation. Defensible, elegant, and the white stone practically glowed in the afternoon sun. Impressive architecture, even by Asgardian standards. "I'm Thor," he announced to the gathering crowd of soldiers and civilians. "God of Thunder currently helping defend Middle-earth against Sauron. I just destroyed about 60,000 of his orcs outside the city. You're welcome." The guards stared. Citizens whispered. A child pointed and asked his mother if Thor was one of the Valar. "Where is your leader?" Thor continued. "I need to coordinate with whoever's in charge of defense. Also, I'm hungry again. Destroying armies works up an appetite." "Lord Thor!" Aragorn's voice carried from the upper levels. The ranger, now clearly more than a ranger, wearing fine armor and carrying himself with royal authority, descended the stairs with Gandalf, Legolas, and Gimli. Behind them came a procession of guards and a man in ornate robes who radiated authority and deep suspicion. "Thor of Asgard," Gandalf said formally. "May I present Denethor, Steward of Gondor and Lord of Minas Tirith." Denethor studied Thor with eyes that had spent years dealing with politics, warfare, and the burden of a kingdom. He saw a warrior in strange armor, crackling with barely controlled power, claiming to be divine. The steward's first instinct was distrust. "So," Denethor said, carefully, his voice carrying the weight of exhausted nobility, "Gandalf brings me tales of a god from another universe, and now you appear during our darkest hour. Convenient timing." Thor's expression cooled slightly. He recognized that tone, suspicion masked as diplomacy. "Not convenient, accidental. I was yanked through dimensional barriers by someone's careless temporal manipulation. But since I'm here, I'm helping. Just broke Sauron's siege army. The survivors are fleeing east. You're safe. For now." "For now," Denethor repeated, seizing on the words. "Meaning you could change your mind? Meaning Gondor's safety depends on the whims of a stranger who claims godhood?" "Father," a younger man stepped forward, Faramir bearing resemblance to Denethor but with gentler eyes. "If Lord Thor has truly scattered Sauron's army, we owe him gratitude, not interrogation." "Gratitude?" Denethor's voice sharpened. "We've ruled Gondor for generations without divine intervention. Now this being appears and demands we trust him? How do we know he's not another of Sauron's deceptions?" Thor's patience, already tested by 3 days of slow travel and primitive warfare, frayed. "You think I'm working for Sauron? The Dark Lord whose army I just obliterated? That's Sauron? You could be sowing confusion, winning our trust before betraying us," Denethor argued, his paranoia evident. "The enemy's schemes are subtle and long-planned." "Oh, for..." Thor raised Mjolnir and every guard in the courtyard tensed. Lightning crackled around the hammer. "If I wanted to destroy Gondor, I wouldn't need subterfuge. I'd just do it. Watch." He pointed at a nearby abandoned building, an old warehouse scheduled for demolition. A single lightning bolt, precisely controlled, struck it. The structure didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely not even dust remained. "That's what I could do to your city if I were your enemy," Thor stated flatly. "No schemes, no deception, just raw power. The fact that Minas Tirith still stands should tell you I'm not hostile." He lowered Mjolnir. "Now, do you want to keep questioning my motives, or can we focus on making sure Sauron doesn't send another army?" Silence held the courtyard. Denethor's face cycled through several emotions: fear, anger, calculation, before settling on grim acceptance. "Very well," the steward said stiffly. "Gondor accepts your assistance. But know this, Thor of Asgard, I will be watching you. Any sign of betrayal, any hint of treachery, and..." And you'll do what exactly? Thor interrupted, genuinely curious. I've faced down frost giants, dark elves, and my own sister. What exactly is your plan if I turn evil? Denethor had no answer to that. Faramir stepped into the awkward silence. Lord Thor, perhaps you'd join us in the council chamber. We have much to discuss regarding Sauron's remaining forces and the overall strategy of the war. Finally, someone with sense, Thor muttered. He turned to follow Faramir, then paused. Oh, and Steward Denethor? Your son has better political instincts than you. Might want to listen to him more often. As Thor walked away, Gandalf allowed himself a small smile. That went better than expected. Better? Denethor hissed. He threatened our city, destroyed property, and insulted me directly. Yes, Gandalf agreed, but he didn't destroy you, which shows remarkable restraint for someone of his power. I suggest you count your blessings and adjust your approach. Thor responds well to directness and poorly to political maneuvering. In the council chamber, Thor examined maps of Middle-earth with professional interest. So Sauron's main fortress is here. He pointed at Mordor. Protected by mountains, volcanic activity, and presumably significant defenses. The Black Gate guards the main entrance, Aragorn explained. Tens of thousands of orcs garrison it. The mountains themselves are nearly impassable, and Sauron's attention is focused there, watching for any military threat. Which is why the hobbits are sneaking through alternate routes, Thor nodded. Smart, classic misdirection. Make the enemy watch one direction while your real strike comes from another. He studied the map more carefully. How close are your hobbits to the volcano? Mount Doom, you called it? Gandalf's expression was troubled. I don't know precisely. The ring clouds my ability to sense Frodo. But they should be crossing into Mordor soon if they haven't already. Every day we buy them is precious. Then we need a bigger distraction, Thor declared. Sauron just lost 60,000 orcs, but according to these maps, he has substantially more in reserve. We need to make him commit those forces away from Mount Doom. What do you propose? Faramir asked, intrigued despite himself. Thor grinned, and everyone in the room felt simultaneously excited and terrified. We attack the Black Gate directly. Full frontal assault with every soldier we can muster. Sauron will see it as either desperation or stupidity. Either way, he'll commit forces to crush us. And while his attention is focused on the army at his doorstep, the hobbits complete their mission, Aragorn finished, understanding dawning. It's brilliant. And suicidal. Only if we actually fight a full battle, Thor corrected. We just need to hold his attention long enough. I can handle most of the actual combat if needed. You all just need to look threatening and survive. Just? Gimli laughed. Lad, you have a very casual relationship with mortality. I'm immortal, Thor pointed out. My relationship with mortality is different by definition. Legolas studied the god warrior thoughtfully. You've given this strategy significant thought for someone who claims to prefer direct combat over tactics. I've been fighting for 1,500 years, Thor replied. You pick up strategic thinking eventually, even if you prefer hitting things. My brother, Loki, the god of mischief, always favored elaborate schemes. I learned by watching him, even if I don't enjoy that approach. Your brother is the god of mischief? Faramir asked with mix of curiosity and concern. It's complicated. He died, then didn't, then kind of betrayed me, then helped save everyone. Family dynamics are messy when everyone's immortal. Thor waved dismissively. Point is, I understand strategy even if I prefer simplicity. And right now we need Sauron looking the wrong direction. Gandalf leaned on his staff, his ancient eyes calculating. The plan has merit, but it requires precise timing. We'd need to march within 3 days to draw Sauron's attention at the right moment. And we'd need every warrior we can gather, not to win but to appear threatening enough to warrant his full attention. Rohan's riders are here, Eomer confirmed, entering the chamber. 6,000 cavalry ready to fight. Not enough to assault the Black Gate under normal circumstances, but with Thor. I can make 6,000 look like 60,000, Thor offered. Illusions aren't my specialty, but I can create enough thunder, lightning, and explosions to suggest a much larger force. Sauron will have to assume the worst and commit accordingly. Aragorn stood, his hand on Andúral's hilt. Then we have our plan. 3 days to prepare, then we march on the Black Gate. Gandalf, how long until Frodo reaches Mount Doom? 4 days, perhaps 5 if he encounters resistance, Gandalf estimated. We'd need to hold Sauron's attention for at least 2 days after we arrive. 2 days against all of Mordor's armies, Gimli mused. This is either the bravest plan I've ever heard or the stupidest. Often the same thing, Thor agreed cheerfully. Now, about that food I mentioned. Destroying armies really does work up an appetite, and I'd like to eat before we start planning the next battle. The steward's madness. Over the next 2 days, Thor's presence in Minas Tirith created ripples through every level of society. Soldiers watched him train in the courtyard, his casual displays of strength involving lifting stone blocks that normally required 10 men. Children followed him through the streets, fascinated by the flying man who summoned lightning. Merchants argued about whether gods required payment for food. Thor insisted on paying, though his Asgardian currency was useless, so he settled for helping with heavy lifting. But not everyone was pleased. Denethor in his private chambers stared into the Palantir, the seeing stone that showed him glimpses of Sauron's power. The Dark Lord's whispers had been growing stronger, feeding the steward's paranoia and despair. He's too powerful, Denethor muttered, watching visions of Thor destroying orc armies with casual ease. No one man should possess such strength. What happens when he tires of helping us? What happens when he decides he should rule? The Palantir showed him twisted visions. Thor turning on Gondor, the White City burning under divine fury, Denethor's own death at the gods' hands. Sauron's subtle corruption working through the seeing stone amplified every fear. Faramir found his father in this state, talking to himself, eyes glazed. Father? The council is gathering to finalize plans for the march. They need your approval. Approval? Denethor's laugh was harsh. They don't need my approval. They have their god warrior. What use is a steward when divinity walks among us? Father, you're not yourself, Faramir said carefully, recognizing signs he'd seen before. The Palantir's corrupting influence. You've been using the seeing stone again, haven't you? You know it shows false visions twisted by... It shows truth, Denethor roared, spinning to face his son. Truth that you and Gandalf and that creature from another world want to hide. We're puppets, Faramir, dancing on strings held by powers we don't understand. In the courtyard below, Thor paused mid-conversation with Aragorn. His divine senses, attuned to disturbances in emotional energy, detected something wrong. Is your steward always this unstable? He asked quietly. Aragorn's expression darkened. Denethor has borne Gondor's burden alone for too long. The weight of it breaks men. And he's been using the Palantir, which Sauron can influence. We should check on him. They arrived at Denethor's chambers to find the steward confronting Faramir, sword drawn, paranoia evident in every word. You're working with them. My own son corrupted by the false god and the Grey Wizard's lies. Father, please, Faramir pleaded, not drawing his own weapon despite clear danger. There are no lies. Thor has helped us. He destroyed the army that would have killed us all. For now, Denethor shrieked. But what's his price? What does a god demand for salvation, our freedom, our souls, our world? Thor stepped into the chamber, his presence immediately drawing Denethor's attention. My price is simple, Thor said calmly, his voice carrying authority that transcended mortal kingship. Information about dimensional travel and enough food to sustain me while I search for a way home. That's it. I don't want your kingdom, your freedom, or your souls. I want to return to my universe where my responsibilities wait. Lies, Denethor hissed, but his sword arm trembled. Even corrupted by paranoia, some part of him recognized the truth in Thor's words. You'll rule us, or destroy us. All gods do eventually. The gods you know, maybe, Thor replied, stepping closer despite the weapon. But I'm from elsewhere, different universe, different rules. In my world, gods protect mortals, not subjugate them. I've spent 1,500 years defending the 9 realms because that's my duty. He held out his hand, not threatening, just offering. Give me the seeing stone. I can sense corruption on it, dark magic twisting your perceptions. You're being manipulated, stewarded by the same enemy you claim to oppose. No! Denethor lunged, not at Thor but at the Palantir, clutching it desperately. The seeing stone flared and suddenly Sauron's presence filled the room, not physically but spiritually. A vast consciousness pressing against reality, focused through the corrupted artifact. So, Sauron's voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere. The god of Asgard meddles in my affairs still. You destroyed 1 army, creature. I have 10 more. Thor's eyes blazed with lightning. You want to have this conversation now, Dark Lord? Fine. I'm Thor Odinson, son of Odin, and I don't cower before shadows hiding in towers. You are nothing, Sauron hissed through the Palantir. An anomaly. A glitch. When the ring returns to me, when I regain my full power, I will find a way to your universe and burn it as I will burn this one. Big talk from someone who needs jewelry to maintain physical form, Thor shot back. He reached out and grabbed the Palantir from Denethor's weakening grasp. The Seeing Stone fought him, dark magic trying to corrupt or repel, but divine immunity trumped Sauron's influence. Let's see if your vision works both ways, Thor growled. He channeled power into the Palantir, not dark magic but pure lightning, divine energy that burned with the fury of storms themselves. In Barad-dûr, Sauron screamed. The connection between Palantiri, meant for communication, became a conduit for Thor's power. Lightning erupted from the Seeing Stone in Mordor's tower, destroying equipment, killing orc servants, forcing even the Dark Lord himself to physically disconnect from the artifact. The Palantir in Thor's hand cracked, dark magic purging from it in wisps of shadow. When the light faded, the Seeing Stone was inert, not destroyed, but cleansed of corruption. There, Thor said, setting the now harmless artifact on a table. No more twisted visions, no more manipulation. Denethor collapsed, the fog of corruption lifting from his mind. He looked around as if waking from nightmare, at his drawn sword, at his terrified son, at the god who just saved him from Sauron's influence. What? What have I done? The steward's voice was hollow. I nearly killed my own son. The things I've seen, were they all lies? Not all, Gandalf said gently, entering the chamber. Sauron shows truth through filters of despair. Your fears were real but amplified and twisted. You're not the first to fall under the Palantir's sway, Denethor. Saruman succumbed as well. I don't deserve... Denethor looked at Faramir, at Aragorn, at Thor. I don't deserve your mercy. I should be imprisoned, removed from power. You should rest, Thor interrupted, and heal. Corruption isn't your fault. It's what evil does. It twists good people into serving it unwillingly. I've seen it happen in my universe. My own brother was corrupted once by the mad titan Thanos, forced to invade Earth. We forgave him because the actions weren't truly his. He placed a hand on Denethor's shoulder and the steward felt warmth, not burning but comforting, like standing near a hearth on winter night. You've borne Gondor's weight alone for too long. That ends now. Aragorn is here, Gandalf is here, and I'm here temporarily. Share the burden. Let others help carry it. Denethor looked at Aragorn with new eyes, seeing not a ranger who threatened his power, but the true king who could relieve him of an impossible weight. "You're Isildur's heir," he said quietly, not accusation but acknowledgement. "The one the prophecies spoke of." "I am," Aragorn confirmed, "and when this war ends, I will take up the crown that has waited generations. But until then, we need unity, not division. Can you fight beside me, Denethor? Not as rival, but as ally?" The steward bowed his head. "I can try, and I'm sorry for everything." Faramir embraced his father, relief evident. "You're still the steward of Gondor, father. That hasn't changed. But now you have help." Thor stepped back, satisfied. "Good. Family reconciliation is important. Trust me, I've had to do it several times with Loki. Now, can we please finalize these battle plans? I'm eager to hit something, and Sauron's face, metaphorically speaking, seems like an excellent target." The march to the Black Gate. 7,000 warriors marched from Minas Tirith toward the Black Gate. Not a large army by the standards of great wars, but everyone a volunteer who understood they marched to probable death. 6,000 Rohirrim on horses, 500 Gondorian soldiers, and scattered rangers, elves and dwarves who'd answered the call. And floating above them all, visible for miles, was Thor. He'd debated walking with the army, showing solidarity through shared hardship. But Gandalf convinced him that visible divine presence served better for morale. So Thor flew slow circuits above the column, occasionally descending to talk with soldiers, always maintaining the image of invincible protector. "This is madness," a Gondorian soldier muttered to his companion as they marched. "We're 7,000 against 100,000, maybe more." "But we have him," his companion replied, pointing up at Thor. "Did you hear what he did to the siege army? Scattered 60,000 orcs in minutes." "Aye, I heard. But can even a god hold against all of Mordor?" Thor, whose divine hearing picked up the conversation despite distance, descended to walk beside them. "The answer to your question is yes," he said cheerfully, causing both soldiers to jump. "I can hold against all of Mordor if needed, but that's not the plan. The plan is to be noisy, threatening, and impossible to ignore while looking like we might actually win. Make Sauron commit his forces to crushing us, keeping his attention here." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, we're essentially bait. Very dangerous, very shiny bait. But bait nonetheless. Your job isn't to win, it's to survive and look threatening while doing it. Think you can manage that?" The soldiers, confronted with a god treating them as equals and explaining strategy, found their fear transforming into grim determination. "We can manage, Lord Thor." "Excellent!" Thor clapped them both on the shoulders hard enough to stagger them. "That's the spirit, remember. We're not trying to defeat Mordor. We're trying to distract it. Huge difference, much more survivable." He floated back up to survey the march, leaving two soldiers who now felt simultaneously terrified and oddly confident. Aragorn rode up beside Gandalf. Thor's approach to leadership is unconventional, but effective, Gandalf observed. He treats common soldiers as warriors worthy of respect and honesty. They'll follow him into any battle because he doesn't pretend their lives are disposable. "Unlike traditional nobility," Legolas added, his elven ears having caught the entire exchange. "Most lords would never admit their army was bait. Thor tells them the truth and they love him for it. It helps that he can actually protect them," Gimli pointed out. "Empty honesty means nothing, but honesty backed by power that can scatter armies, that inspires loyalty." The march continued for 3 days. They passed through lands corrupted by Mordor's influence, withered fields, poisoned streams, trees that had died and refused to fall. The closer they came to the Black Gate, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. But Thor's presence pushed back against that oppression. His divine nature, his connection to storms and sky and clean lightning created a bubble of normalcy around the army. Where Mordor's corruption caused despair, Thor's thunder brought defiance. On the third night, camped within sight of the Black Gate itself, the War Council gathered. "Tomorrow we make our stand," Aragorn said, studying the massive fortification ahead. The Black Gate rose like a wall of iron and malice, its towers flanked by mountains. Behind it, smoke and fire suggested armies beyond counting. "Sauron knows we're here," Gandalf confirmed. "I can feel his attention on us like weight pressing down. He's curious about our audacity. 7,000 warriors marching to his doorstep. He's probably trying to figure out if we're suicidal or if we know something he doesn't," Thor added. He'd spent the evening scouting, flying high enough to see the armies assembling behind the Black Gate. There are at least 80,000 orcs back there. Trolls, siege weapons, probably other nasties I don't have names for yet. When that gate opens, it'll be like floodwater pouring through a broken dam. "Can you hold them?" Yomer asked the question everyone was thinking. Thor considered carefully. "Alone? Yes. I could hold that gate indefinitely. I'd just position myself in the opening and make it physically impossible for anything to pass, but that's not the plan. We need Sauron to commit his forces to open battle, not just throw them against an impenetrable wall. So we fight in the open," Aragorn concluded. "Draw them out, engage across a wide front. And I'll be everywhere at once," Thor confirmed. "Moving at speed, hitting crucial targets, making sure no one gets overrun. Your job, all of you, is to look brave, stay in formation, and survive. Can you do that?" Gimli laughed, the sound incongruous in the shadow of Mordor. "Lad, we're dwarves, men and elves who fought in every major battle of this age. Surviving impossible odds is what we do." "Perfect," Thor grinned. "Then let's give Sauron a show he'll never forget." As the council dispersed, Legolas lingered. "Thor, a question that's troubled me since we met. You speak often of returning home, of this being temporary. But what if you can't return? What if you're truly stranded here?" Thor was silent for a moment, watching lightning flicker in the distant storms over Mordor. "Then I adapt. I'd miss Asgard, miss my friends and duties, but I've lost my home before, literally lost it, watched it burn to save my people. If this becomes permanent..." He shrugged. "Middle-earth could use a god who's willing to actively protect it. Your valor seem very hands-off." "They are," Legolas agreed. "The Valar withdrew from direct intervention after the First Age, believing that the peoples of Middle-earth must determine their own fates." "Noble sentiment," Thor said. "Also a bit lazy. When I protect the 9 realms, I don't sit in a palace waiting for mortals to figure things out. I'm there, fighting beside them, taking hits they can't survive. That's what gods are for." "Perhaps you'll teach the Valar that lesson," Legolas suggested with slight smile. "If you meet them. If I'm stuck here long enough, I'll definitely hunt them down and have words," Thor promised. "Nothing I enjoy more than lecturing distant cosmic entities about their responsibilities. Ask the Celestials. I've given them that speech several times." The night passed with surprising peace. Men who expected to die often found strange calm before battle. Thor spent the pre-dawn hours walking among the soldiers, offering encouragement, sometimes just sitting silently with those who needed presence over words. As the sun rose over Mordor, weak light filtered through ash and smoke. The army assembled in formation facing the Black Gate. Aragorn rode to the front, Anduril raised high. Soldiers of Gondor, riders of Rohan, warriors of the free peoples, today we stand at the very gates of hell itself. A cheer rose, thin but defiant. We are outnumbered 10-1, perhaps more, but we do not stand alone. Aragorn gestured upward where Thor floated wreathed in lightning. We stand with a god with divine fury and righteous thunder, and we stand for all free people of Middle-earth. Thor descended, landing beside Aragorn's horse. He raised Mjolnir high, and the sky responded. Storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, swirling into position directly above Mordor's gate. Sauron! Thor's voice carried with divine authority, audible for miles. I am Thor Odinson, god of thunder, and I challenge you. Send your armies, send your legends, send everything you have, because today Middle-earth fights back. Lightning struck the ground before the black gate, carving a line of scorched earth. The challenge was unmistakable. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the black gate opened. The Battle of the Morannon. The armies of Mordor poured through the black gate like a tide of corruption made manifest. Orcs in numbers beyond counting, each bred for war and knowing nothing but violence. Cave trolls, 20 feet of armored fury, wielding clubs that could shatter stone. Uruk-hai, elite trolls with crude intelligence and tactical awareness. And things without names, creatures from Mordor's deepest pits, mutations and experiments that should never have existed. 80,000 strong, they emerged into the ashen plain before the gate. The 7,000 defenders of Middle-earth stood firm, weapons ready, hearts pounding, and Thor grinned with pure warrior's joy. Finally, he roared, a proper fight! He shot forward like lightning made flesh, Mjolnir leading. The hammer struck the front ranks of orcs with force that created a visible shockwave. Bodies launched hundreds of feet. The ground itself cracked from the impact. Thor spun, using his momentum to carry Mjolnir in a wide arc. The hammer crushed everything it touched, armor, weapons, flesh, bone, all equally irrelevant before divine force. Where Thor moved, paths of destruction followed. But 80,000 was not 60,000. The army at Helm's Deep had been compact, concentrated. This force spread across miles of front, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. Shield wall! Aragorn commanded, and the Gondorian soldiers locked shields as the orc tide approached. The Rohirrim formed wedges, preparing cavalry charges. Legolas and a company of elven archers began loosing arrows with inhuman accuracy. The armies crashed together. Thor found himself in the center of the melee, exactly where he wanted to be. An orc captain swung at him with a massive blade. Thor caught it with his free hand, crushed it to scrap metal, then used the orc itself as a weapon, throwing the creature with enough force to bowl over 20 of its fellows. A cave troll charged him, roaring challenge. Thor met the charge head-on. They collided with impact that shook the ground. The troll, weighing several tons and built like mobile siege equipment, was stopped dead. Thor, barely reaching its chest in height, had planted his feet and simply refused to move. You're big, Thor observed conversationally, even as the troll tried to push him backward. We have creatures like you in Jotunheim. Bigger, actually. They're much better at wrestling. He grabbed the troll's arms and pulled. Not hard by his standards, just a casual tug. The creature flew over Thor's head, tumbling through the air to crash into siege equipment 100 yards back. Next! Thor called cheerfully, spinning to face the next wave. But even Thor couldn't be everywhere. The battle line stretched for miles. Orcs pressed against the shield wall. Trolls smashed into cavalry formations. The defenders fought with desperate courage, but they were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Legolas! Gimli's voice carried over the chaos. The dwarf was surrounded, his axes red with orc blood. But there were too many. Could use some help! Legolas loosed 6 arrows in 2 seconds, each one killing an orc threatening Gimli. "Hold your position, Thor is busy," Thor finished, appearing beside them in a crack of thunder. He teleported using lightning, a trick he rarely used but which proved invaluable on vast battlefields. "I'm never too busy to help allies." He slammed Mjolnir into the ground, and lightning erupted in a circle around them. The electromagnetic pulse didn't hurt flesh directly. Thor had learned precise control over millennia. But it overloaded the primitive nervous systems of every orc within 50 feet. They collapsed, stunned, giving the defenders breathing room. "That's a neat trick," Gimli gasped, catching his breath. "You'll have to teach me how to do that." "You'd need divine heritage and about 1,500 years of practice," Thor replied. "But I appreciate the enthusiasm." He was already scanning for the next crisis point. On the right flank, Rohirrim were being pressed by Uruk-hai, the intelligent trolls working in coordinated packs. Eomer's cavalry charges shattered orc formations but bounced off troll armor like water off stone. Thor flew there at lightning speed, covering half a mile in seconds. He crashed into the Uruk-hai formation from above, Mjolnir extended like a battering ram. The impact cratered the ground and scattered the trolls like bowling pins. "You want intelligent opponents?" Thor challenged the Uruk-hai, who were regrouping with disturbing coordination. "Let's see how smart you really are." He threw Mjolnir. The hammer moved with guided precision, striking the first troll, bouncing to the second, third, fourth, ricocheting through the formation like a divine billiard ball. Each impact broke armor, shattered weapons, sent trolls tumbling. When Mjolnir returned to Thor's hand, 7 Uruk-hai lay unconscious or worse. "Anyone else?" Thor roared at the surviving trolls. They exchanged glances, a very human gesture of uncertainty, then retreated. Intelligence meant recognizing when you were outmatched, but for every crisis Thor solved, 2 more emerged. The battlefield was too large, the enemy too numerous. His allies were skilled, brave, determined, but mortal. They tired, they bled, they fell. "This isn't working," Gandalf called out, his voice strained from channeling magic. The wizard had been using his power to bolster morale, to push back against the psychic weight of Mordor's corruption, but even Gandalf's strength had limits. "Thor, we need something dramatic, something to shift the momentum." Thor assessed the battlefield with tactical eye. 7,000 defenders now reduced to perhaps 6,000 through casualties. 80,000 attackers barely reduced at all. His allies forming a circle, backs together, surrounded on all sides. They needed theater. They needed spectacle. They needed something that would terrify Sauron's forces and inspire his allies simultaneously. Thor flew straight up, accelerating until he was a mile above the battlefield. From this height, the battle looked like an anthill, tiny figures swarming, killing, dying. Beautiful and terrible. He raised Mjolnir to the sky and called the storm, not a local tempest, not a battlefield weather effect. Thor reached deep into his divine nature, connected to the fundamental forces that made him a god, and summoned the fury of Asgard itself. The storm that formed above the Morannon was visible from Minas Tirith 70 miles away. Black clouds swirled into a maelstrom of divine rage. Lightning danced between cloud layers in patterns that spelled doom in every language. On the battlefield below, everyone stopped fighting. Orcs looked up in primal fear. Trolls, creatures without imagination, felt terror for the first time. Even the defenders of Middle-earth stared in awe. "Armies of Mordor!" Thor's voice boomed from the storm itself, seeming to come from every direction simultaneously. "You face not merely mortal warriors, you face the wrath of Asgard, the fury of storms, the judgment of gods." He descended through the clouds like vengeance made flesh, lightning trailing behind him. As he fell, he channeled power, more than he'd used since arriving in Middle-earth. more than he'd used since fighting Hela. Thor hit the ground at the exact center of the battle. The resulting explosion of pure lightning expanded in a perfect sphere, 500 feet in diameter. Every enemy caught in that sphere was either instantly killed or thrown hundreds of yards. The ground itself turned to glass from heat. The air ignited. When the light faded, Thor stood in a crater of his own making, steam rising from his armor. Mjolnir blazed with power that made it impossible to look at directly. "I have been patient," Thor continued, his voice carrying divine fury. "I have been restrained. I have allowed you to fight mortals who, while brave, are beneath my personal attention, but no more." He pointed Mjolnir at the Black Gate itself, at the fortification that had stood for millennia, symbol of Sauron's power. "You want to know what gods can do? Watch!" Lightning streaked from Thor's hammer to the Black Gate. Not one bolt, hundreds. A sustained barrage that struck the massive structure with systematic precision. The metal gates, forged with dark magic and designed to withstand siege weapons, began to glow, then melt, then vaporize. The towers flanking the gate cracked. Stone that had been magically reinforced for centuries proved inadequate against sustained divine lightning. The entire structure groaned, shuddered, and began to collapse. The Black Gate, primary entrance to Mordor, fortress that had never fallen in all the long years of Sauron's reign, came crashing down in a cascade of stone and molten metal. The Orc army broke, not retreated, broke. Discipline evaporated, formations dissolved. 80,000 warriors bred for courage and violence discovered that even genetic conditioning had limits when confronted with a god deliberately showing his full power. They fled back toward Mordor, trampling each other in panic. Thor let them go. Killing fleeing enemies wasn't honorable, and more importantly, he needed them to carry word back to Sauron. Challenging Asgard's gods was a terrible idea. The defenders of Middle-earth stood in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. The battle that should have killed them all had been won. The impregnable Black Gate had been destroyed, and a god stood in the center of devastation, barely winded. "Well," Gimli said into the silence, his voice carrying farther than intended in the sudden quiet. "That was moderately impressive." Laughter rippled through the surviving warriors, desperate, relieved laughter of those who'd expected death and found salvation instead. Thor flew back to where Aragorn, Gandalf, and the other leaders stood. "I may have gotten carried away," he admitted. "The Black Gate was excessive, but I was making a point. Plus, I'd been saving that storm for 3 days and it needed to get used." "You destroyed Mordor's primary defense," Aragorn said slowly. "In minutes. Thor, do you realize what you've done?" "Won the battle," Thor offered. "Saved your lives? Made Sauron very, very angry?" "All of that," Gandalf confirmed, though his expression was troubled. "But you've also shown Middle-earth and Sauron the true extent of your power. There will be consequences." "I hope so," Thor replied seriously. "Because the consequence I want is Sauron focusing entirely on me instead of your hobbits. If he's terrified of what I might do, he'll commit everything to stopping me, which means..." He trailed off, looking east toward Mount Doom, visible in the distance. A bright flash of light erupted from the volcano. Not explosive, cleansing, pure, the light of something ending. "The ring," Gandalf breathed. "Frodo's done it. The ring is destroyed." They felt it immediately. The change in atmosphere. The oppressive weight of Mordor's corruption lifted. The sky began to clear, and from Barad-dûr, Sauron's tower, a scream of rage and despair carried across miles. Thor watched as the dark tower collapsed, centuries of dark architecture crumbling as the power sustaining it vanished. Sauron, diminished beyond recovery, dissipated into formless malice that would never again take physical shape. "Your farmers did it," Thor said with genuine admiration. "They actually did it. Walked into the heart of evil itself and destroyed the source of Sauron's power. He shook his head. "That's genuinely heroic. Most mortals in my universe wouldn't attempt something that suicidal." "Hobbits are tougher than they appear," Aragorn said, relief evident in his voice. "Though they'll need rescue. Mount Doom is erupting." "I'll get them," Thor offered immediately. "Just point me in the right direction." "The volcano 2 miles east," Gandalf directed. "But Thor, be careful. The area is collapsing. Even divine power can't hold back geological catastrophe." "Watch me," Thor said with confidence. He shot into the sky, accelerating toward Mount Doom. The volcano was in full eruption, lava pouring down its sides, the mountain literally tearing itself apart as Sauron's magic unraveled. Thor flew through toxic ash clouds that would kill mortals in seconds, his divine constitution unaffected. He found them near the top, 2 small figures on a rocky outcrop surrounded by lava, no visible escape. Thor recognized the description: Frodo and Sam, the hobbits who'd carried the ring to its destruction. "Need a lift?" Thor called out, descending through the superheated air. Both hobbits looked up in shock. They'd expected death by volcano. They had not expected a flying warrior in armor to offer rescue. You're the god!" Sam gasped. "The one from the stories." "Thor, actually," he corrected, landing on their outcrop with perfect balance despite the unstable rock. "But the god works too. Now we need to leave, immediately. This mountain is about to blow properly, and while I can survive that, you definitely can't." He scooped up both hobbits, one under each arm, and launched back into the sky just as their outcrop collapsed into lava. Sam yelped. Frodo, exhausted beyond words, just closed his eyes and accepted that apparently gods gave rescue rides. Thor carried them away from Mount Doom at speeds that made conversation impossible. Within minutes, they were clear of the eruption zone, descending toward where eagles were arriving. Gandalf had summoned them as backup, but Thor had beaten them there. "Thank you," Frodo managed as Thor set them down gently. "You saved us." "You saved Middle-earth," Thor countered. "I just provided air transportation. What you did, walking into Mordor, resisting the ring's corruption long enough to destroy it, that's genuine heroism. I'm impressed." He turned to where Gandalf and Aragorn were approaching. "Your hobbits are safe. Tired, probably traumatized, definitely need medical attention, but alive." "Then it's over," Aragorn said, wonder in his voice. "The war is won. Sauron is defeated. Middle-earth is saved." Thor looked around at the aftermath, the collapsed Black Gate, the falling Barad-dûr, the scattering armies of Mordor dissolving without leadership. Yes, it is. Good job, everyone. Solid teamwork." But even as he celebrated their victory, Thor felt it, a tug on his divine essence, pulling from a specific direction. Something calling to him. Magic different from Middle-earth's subtle workings. This was raw, powerful, and familiar in a way he couldn't immediately place. "What's wrong?" Gandalf asked, noting Thor's distraction. "I feel something," Thor said slowly. "Magic. Strong magic. His eyes widened with realization. "It's similar to Bifrost energy. How is that possible?" Gandalf's expression became very serious. "The Valor. They've been watching you since you arrived. If they sense dimensional magic in you, magic that could send you home." He gripped his staff. "They may have answers, and they may be calling you to Valinor." "The realm of your gods," Thor confirmed. "How do I get there?" "Normally you don't," Gandalf replied. Valinor is closed to mortals. Only elves and those specifically invited can travel there. But for you," he smiled slightly, "I suspect the rules may be different. Follow that pull, Thor. See where it leads. The Valar rarely summon anyone. If they're calling you, it's important." Thor nodded, then turned to the assembled heroes: Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Éomer, Faramir, the hobbits. Warriors he'd fought beside, people he'd come to respect despite their mortality and primitive technology. "This is probably goodbye," he said simply. "If the Valar can send me home, I'm taking that opportunity. My universe needs me, but..." He smiled. "It's been an honor fighting beside you all. You're brave, skilled, and stubborn, all excellent qualities in warriors." "Will we see you again?" Sam asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Probably not," Thor admitted. "Dimensional travel isn't casual, but if your universe ever faces another crisis, if someone tears open reality again..." He grinned. "I'll remember Middle-earth, and I'll consider visiting. Maybe bring my friends. They'd enjoy meeting actual hobbits." He clasped forearms with Aragorn. "Rule well, King of Gondor, you've earned it." "Thank you, Thor of Asgard," Aragorn replied. "For everything." Thor hugged Gimli, nearly crushing the dwarf, bowed to Legolas with genuine respect, ruffled Sam's hair and gently clasped Frodo's hand, nodded to Éomer, Faramir, and the other warriors. Then he turned toward the west, toward where the magical pull originated, and flew. Not at lightning speed, this was a journey he felt should be savored. His last flight through Middle-earth before, hopefully, returning home. Behind him, the heroes of the War of the Ring watched him go. A god returning to his own mysteries, leaving behind legends that would be told for ages. The Undying Lands. The journey west took Thor over terrain that gradually shifted from war-torn to pristine. Mountains that had never known industry. Forests that grew with primal vitality. And finally the sea, vast and silver, reflecting light that didn't quite match the sun's angle. The pull grew stronger, leading him across the ocean to an island that appeared out of mist like a dream becoming solid. Valinor, the Undying Lands, home of the Valar. Thor landed on a beach of silver sand where the waves sang instead of crashed. The air itself felt different, purer, older, pregnant with power that made even his divine senses acknowledge this was a place of genuine gods. "Welcome, Thor Odinson." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, male and female simultaneously, carrying weight that transcended language. "We are the Valar. We have waited for you." Figures materialized from the landscape itself, beings of immense power taking semi-physical forms. Thor counted 14 major presences, each radiating authority over different domains. Creation, nature, water, wind, craftsmanship, war, judgment. "You've been watching," Thor stated, not accusation, just fact. "We have," confirmed Manwë, chief of the Valar, his form suggesting wind and sky and storm, domains Thor understood intimately. "You are an anomaly, Thor of Asgard, a god from beyond our creation possessing power that shouldn't exist in Arda. And yet you didn't interfere when I fought Sauron," Thor observed. "Gandalf said you prefer hands-off approach." "We learned through bitter experience," Ulmo spoke, his voice like ocean depths. "Direct intervention by the Valar often causes more harm than good. The wars of wrath reshaped continents and killed countless innocents. We vowed to guide, not rule." "Cowardly," Thor said bluntly, and several Valar bristled. "Your people face apocalyptic evil and you hide in paradise offering guidance? That's not divine responsibility, that's abandonment." "You dare," began Tulkas, the Valar of war and strength. "I dare because I'm not subject to your rules," Thor interrupted. "In my universe, gods protect mortals actively. When Asgard's people are threatened, I don't send wisdom, I send lightning. I fight beside them, I bleed for them. That's what divine power is for. Manwë raised a hand, calming Tulkas. Your criticism has merit, Thor Odinson, but you speak from different tradition. The Valar are not warriors. We are shapers, guardians of order. And that worked so well with Melkor, Thor shot back. Your own brother corrupted into becoming the first Dark Lord. How'd that hands-off approach work then? The silence was heavy. Thor had struck a wound that had never healed. The betrayal of Melkor, the corruption that led to millennia of war. You are remarkably blunt for one seeking our help, Varda observed, her form suggesting starlight and beauty beyond mortal comprehension. I don't beg, Thor stated. I'm grateful you might help me home, but I'm not going to pretend your approach is perfect just to earn that help. If you can send me back, I'd appreciate it. If not, I'll find another way. To his surprise, Manwë laughed, a sound like wind through mountain peaks. You remind us of what we were in the beginning, before we became cautious, before we learned to fear our own power. He stepped closer, his form solidifying into something almost human. Very well, Thor. We will help you return home. But first, answer us this. What did you learn in Middle-earth? Thor considered the question carefully. I learned that courage isn't about power. The hobbits who destroyed Sauron's ring had no divine strength, no supernatural abilities, just determination and friendship. That's... He struggled for words. That's humbling. In my universe, heroes tend to be enhanced. Super soldiers, gods, beings with special abilities. But you're hobbits. Regular people who did extraordinary things. And, prompted Olla, the craftsman Vala. And I learned that sometimes restraint is harder than action, Thor admitted. I wanted to fly straight to Mordor and solve everything with force, but that would have meant Frodo's sacrifice meant nothing. Sometimes the hard way is the right way. Manwë nodded slowly. You have grown, Thor Odinson. You arrived in our world as power seeking direction. You leave as power tempered by purpose. That growth, he smiled, that is worth celebrating. The Valar began weaving magic, not crude or forceful, elegant, precise, working with the fundamental fabric of reality itself. Thor watched with professional interest as they identified the dimensional breach that had brought him here, the scar in space-time created by Kronika's temporal manipulation. The breach is healing, Ulmo explained as they worked. But we can widen it temporarily, create a corridor back to your 9 realms. It will require all our strength working in concert. Will it harm you? Thor asked, surprising the Valar with his concern. No, Varda assured him. But it will exhaust us. We do not undertake this lightly. Then I'm grateful, Thor said sincerely. For what it's worth, your world is beautiful. Flawed, but beautiful. If you ever decide to be more active in protecting it, I think Middle-earth would benefit. We will consider your words, Manwë replied. Now stand ready. The path home opens. Reality tore, not violently like his arrival, but carefully, like surgeons opening a wound to heal it. Thor saw his universe on the other side, the familiar stars, the cosmic geography of the 9 realms, and incredibly the Bifrost site where Heimdall stood watching. Heimdall, Thor called through the gap. Can you hear me? Thor! The gatekeeper's relief was palpable even across dimensional barriers. Where have you been? It's been 3 days. Different universe, long story. Can you lock onto my position and pull me through? Working on it. The Bifrost's rainbow energy began streaming through the gap, drawn by Heimdall's control and the Valar's magic. The two systems, Asgardian technology and divine Valar power, interacted in ways neither had been designed for, but they worked. Thor felt the pull of home, stronger than any magic Middle-earth could offer. Thank you, he said to the Valar, for everything. And seriously, consider being more hands-on. Your people deserve active gods, not distant ones. We shall consider it, Manwë promised. Farewell, Thor Odinson. May your 9 realms find peace. May your Middle-earth do the same. The Bifrost pulled, the Valor pushed, and reality snapped back into proper alignment. Thor was yanked through dimensions, across the void between universes, traveling faster than light or thought. He crashed onto the Bifrost platform with considerably more grace than his departure. Heimdall caught him, steadying the god of thunder with strong hands. "Welcome home, my friend," Heimdall said simply. Thor looked around at familiar Asgard, at the palace in the distance, at the stars he'd known for 1,500 years. Home. Actually home. "It's good to be back," Thor breathed, "though you're not going to believe where I've been." "Try me," Heimdall smiled. "I saw fragments through the dimensional breach, enough to know you fought in another universe's war." As they walked toward the palace, Thor began explaining. "So there's this ring that makes you evil, and small farmers had to throw it into a volcano, and I accidentally broke a gate that had stood for millennia. And there were these Wraith Riders who were deeply unimpressive, and..." His voice faded as they entered the palace, leaving behind the Bifrost site where, for just a moment, the rainbow bridge flickered with patterns that weren't quite Asgardian. A gift from the Valar, perhaps, or a reminder that the universes weren't as separate as everyone believed. Middle-earth. 3 months later. In the gardens of Minas Tirith, King Aragorn Elessar stood with Gandalf, watching the sunset paint the white city in shades of gold. "He's become legend already," Aragorn observed. "Children play games about Thor the Thunderbringer. Soldiers tell stories that grow more exaggerated with each telling. By next year, they'll claim he fought 1,000,000 orcs and destroyed Mordor with a sneeze." "Let them," Gandalf replied, smoke from his pipe curling into the evening air. "Middle-earth needs legends." "And Thor," the wizard smiled, "Thor earned his. He arrived by accident, could have simply searched for home and ignored our war. Instead, he fought beside us, saved countless lives, and helped end Sauron's reign." "Do you think he found peace?" Aragorn asked. "In his universe?" "I suspect Thor never finds true peace," Gandalf said. "Warriors like him are driven by duty and honor. But he found his way home, and that's all we could hope for." In the Shire, Sam Gamgee told his children about the god who'd rescued him from Mount Doom. Big as 3 men stacked he was, with lightning in his eyes and a hammer that could flatten mountains. And he picked up your old gaffer like he weighed nothing at all. The story wasn't entirely accurate, but it captured the spirit. In Rivendell, Elrond added Thor's brief time in Middle-earth to the histories. The scholars of future ages would debate whether the god of thunder was literal truth or metaphorical representation of hope during dark times. Those who'd met him knew the truth. Asgard, same moment. Thor stood in Odin's former throne room, now his throne room, though he rarely used it. Valkyrie handled most administrative duties. Thor preferred being among the people, training warriors, occasionally visiting Midgard to check on the Avengers. "You're brooding," Valkyrie observed, entering with characteristic lack of ceremony. "That's usually Loki's thing, which, since he's currently pretending to be dead again, means you need to stop it. You're ruining his brand." Thor smiled despite himself. "I was thinking about Middle-earth, the universe I visited when the Bifrost malfunctioned. The one with the evil jewelry and the farmers who saved everything. That's the one." Thor turned from the window overlooking New Asgard. "They fought so hard with so little. No technology, limited magic, just determination and courage. And they won." "So why the long face?" Valkyrie asked. "Because I wonder if I did more harm than good," Thor admitted. I destroyed armies, broke sieges, changed the course of their war. What if my presence prevented them from growing stronger through adversity? What if I robbed them of lessons they needed to learn? Valkyrie considered this, then punched Thor's shoulder. Hard. You're overthinking. You helped people who needed help. That's what gods do, or what they should do anyway. Stop second-guessing and accept that you made a difference. When did you become so wise? Thor asked. I've always been wise. You just rarely listen. Valkyrie headed for the door, then paused. Though for what it's worth, that Middle-earth sounds interesting. If dimensional travel ever becomes safe and reliable, I wouldn't mind visiting. Fighting orcs sounds therapeutic. After she left, Thor returned to the window. Somewhere out there, across dimensional barriers and universal boundaries, Middle-earth continued. People living, loving, fighting, building. A world he'd touched briefly but would remember always. His hand found Mjolnir's handle, the hammer responding to his touch with familiar warmth. Perhaps someday, Thor murmured. When both our worlds are ready, we'll meet again. Thunder rumbled in the clear sky, a god's promise to himself. Somewhere between universes, the Valor watched through means mortals couldn't comprehend. They saw Thor in Asgard, saw Middle-earth recovering from war, saw the barrier between universes slowly healing. He changed us, Manwë observed, his criticism, his different approach. Already we find ourselves more active, more present in our people's lives. Is that wise? Questioned Mandos, keeper of doom and judgment. We swore not to interfere after the wars of wrath. We swore not to wage war that destroys as much as it saves, Varda corrected. Thor showed us there's middle ground. Protection without domination. Presence without control. The small ones, the hobbits, taught us the same lesson, Ulmo added. Power isn't about force, it's about choices. The Valar fell silent, contemplating. Change came slowly to immortal beings, but it came. In Middle-earth, the age of gods taking active roles in mortal affairs had ended long ago. But perhaps the Valar thought, perhaps it was time to reconsider. After all, a god from another universe had shown them a different way. The least they could do was learn from his example. Heimdall stood watch as always, his all-seeing eyes scanning the 9 realms and beyond. Since Thor's dimensional accident, the gatekeeper had been monitoring the spaces between universes more carefully. What he saw made him smile, barriers healing, natural order restoring, but also thin places where realities touched, not breaches, connections, as if the universe itself had learned something from Thor's accidental journey. Heimdall, Thor's voice came from behind. What do you see? Everything as always, the gatekeeper replied, but also something new. The way between realms is healing, but it remembers the path it created. If we needed, if Middle-earth needed, the journey could be made again. Deliberately this time, Thor understood, not yanked through by accident. Precisely. Thor stood beside his friend, looking out at the cosmos. Good. I made friends there. It would be nice to visit them properly someday. Maybe bring you along. You'd like Legolas, excellent vision for a mortal. I shall keep watch, Heimdall promised, and if the time comes when worlds should meet again, I will know. They stood together in comfortable silence, guardians of Asgard, protectors of the 9 realms, but now also connected, however tenuously, to a universe of hobbits and elves and men who taught a god that power without purpose was just noise. Thor smiled, thinking of Sam's cooking, Gimli's humor, Aragorn's nobility, Gandalf's wisdom. Keep watching, old friend, Thor said quietly. The multiverse is bigger than we knew, and somewhere out there other heroes fight other wars. If they ever need help, we'll be ready, Heimdall finished. Above them, the stars shone, familiar constellations of the 9 realms, but also, if you knew how to look, the faintest glimmer of other patterns, other worlds, other possibilities. The god of thunder had visited Middle-earth and returned home. But the story, as all the best stories do, left possibilities open, for sequels, for returns, for the day when worlds might deliberately reach across the void and say, "We remember, and we're still friends."